Is this seat taken?" I looked up and met the deep brown eyes of a woman about my age, mid-20s. She had long, straight, dark hair and looked quite attractive. Somehow, in those first few seconds, she let me know that she felt as lost at this conference as I did. The 1975 annual meeting of the Association for Computing Machinery. She stood politely, waiting for my answer. I got lost in her eyes for a moment, and suddenly it dawned on me that I had been asked a question. I muttered, "Oh yes, please sit down. No, this seat is not taken." I pointed to the seat next to me. She sank into a chair, placing her conference notepad under the chair. She turned to me. "My friends call me Em. You can be my friend." She extended her hand, and I automatically shook it. She held my hand a little longer than I expected, studying my face. In those seconds, a light spark flashed between us. I stared blankly at Em, processing and replaying her words in my head. She was the first person I spoke to in 3 days other than the waiter or room service, and even with them I didn't say much. Finally, I collected my thoughts and answered. "My name is Matt Carter. I'm from Boston. Well, actually, from the Boston suburbs, from Lexington. I work at Digital Devices. They sent me here for a week. I have to soak up all this information, especially the articles on databases. This will probably be my project area. I've only been working there for 2 years." Most of what I just said could have been recognized by the badge I wore on a lanyard around my neck. It included my name, the company I work for, and the city. The rest could have been guessed by my age, and in retrospect, by the fact that, like 3/4 of the men at the conference, I wore a pocket protector with neatly arranged pens and mechanical pencils. I tried to read M's badge. When she realized I was trying to read the tag, she turned to me and thrust her breasts in my direction. "Emma Clee, verbatim, Palo Alto." I tried not to pay attention to the landscape surrounding the badge, although it was difficult not to notice that M had curves and considerable ones. M wasn't trying to seduce me. She was a woman, and I instantly realized that she had the same basic genes as me, nerd or geek, depending on your preference. Why else would she be at this conference? She wore freshly pressed gray trousers and a white blouse. A maroon V-neck sweater and brown loafers completed the entire ensemble. This outfit seemed to be worn by half of the few women at the conference, and certainly by most of my female colleagues on the East Coast. I suddenly blushed, realizing that I was looking at her badge and peripherally at her breasts. Em laughed out loud. "It's okay, Matt. I didn't mean to shock you. I just wanted to make it easier for you to read my tag." She paused, seeing my confusion, and then asked, "I work in the field of high-density storage systems. Do you know the company verbatim?" I shook my head. I haven't heard of her company. She's 6 years old. I've only been working there for 2 years since I got my master's degree. They specialize in magnetic data storage. You know, the 8-inch floppy disks your center uses to store some data, that's us. "What are you doing there?" I asked out of genuine curiosity. "I've been assigned to work on the next generation of storage media. I'm an electrical engineer, Caltech." I said, "I didn't know there were girls at Caltech." M smiled. "Just the last 5 years. I transferred from UCLA, got a bachelor's degree, and then a master's degree in magnetic storage systems. I didn't think about it at the time, but it really narrowed down my job search options." She paused and asked, "And you?" I said, "Nothing too exotic. I barely finished my undergraduate degree in electrical engineering at Rensselaer Poly in upstate New York, and then I was lucky enough to get into MIT's master's program. I graduated 2 years ago and was worried about getting drafted into the Vietnam War. Digital hired me and gave me a deferment because they were doing work for the Air Force, and I was deemed essential to the project. 3 months ago, I was transferred to this database program, and here I am." Our conversation continued. It was easy for me to communicate with them, and I knew that she felt the same about me. That's what she said. She wasn't rude, but her remarks were direct, and she didn't mince words. I had the feeling that if a thought popped into her head, I would hear about it within seconds. More attractive than her frankness was that she radiated an inner light. She wasn't a beauty, but M was a genuinely happy person. There was a cheerful tone to her voice. She had a way of turning my negative comments about the conference into positives. She laughed easily and smiled often. She also touched me on the arm or shoulder without fear of how I would react. At heart, I felt that she was a free spirit, albeit one who had also mastered the fast-changing field of electrical engineering at probably the best engineering school in the country. Lunch was served amidst a crowd of waiters and waitresses milling about among the thousands of participants seated 10 to a table in the enormous ballroom of the Sheraton Hotel in Los Angeles. When we finished lunch, the event leader stood up and announced the opening of the lunch meeting. After a few remarks, he introduced the keynote speaker, Jerome Wiesner, president of MIT. I saw him once at my last graduation and later learned of his high profile in the tech community. Wiesner spoke for 45 minutes about the future of computers. I listened to him with great attention, thinking about the positive prospects for digital devices, my company. At one point, Wiesner referred to the so-called Moore's Law, summing up the productivity growth of integrated circuits as doubling every 18 months. M nudged me and whispered, "Moore spoke at Caltech. He's our graduate. He's now the head of Intel. A good man." I nodded. After the lunchtime speech, the meeting ended. M grabbed my hand as we stood up and said, "Come on, let's go outside. I need some sun. I'm already wasting away in these windowless rooms." Holding my hand, she purposefully led me out of the hall into a wide corridor and then out a side door onto the street. The blinding sunlight from the California sky made me wince as we walked to the hotel pool. M continued to hold my hand, confidently leading us to the pool. I was touched by this, and my heart actually started beating faster at the physical contact. "Let's sit here," M announced, choosing a pair of plastic lounge chairs. Most of the pool area was empty, except for the growing number of conference participants strolling by. Near the shallow water, several families were enjoying the water, accompanied by the squeals of children splashing in the pool. M pulled the sweater over her head, leaving her in a white blouse. She was without a bra, which I immediately noticed and tried to ignore as quickly as possible. To my surprise, she also unfastened the belt on her pants and began to pull them off. Under the trousers, thank God, there were panties from a light blue bikini, which emphasized her slender legs. I swallowed hard. There was no doubt her curves were real. "You scared me for a minute," I remarked bluntly. M laughed at my momentary embarrassment. After throwing her sweater and trousers onto a nearby chair, she lay down on the lounge chair. I stretched out next to her, although I felt awkward in the pool area with my clothes on. In response to my question, she said that at her last conference she learned to go outside and therefore came prepared for this one. She said, "Let me soak up the sun for a while and I'll get dressed again. If I'm embarrassing you, you can leave, but I enjoy your company. You're sweet." Cute is not a word that has ever been used to describe me. I was an engineer, 6 feet tall, with long, unkempt hair and fair skin. I have lived on my own since I was 18, the eldest and most mature of 3 siblings. I recognized that I was socially dense compared to many of my colleagues. I dated several girls in high school and college, and lately I've narrowed my rare dates to one girl my age, Megan Winston. Neither Megan nor any other girl I've dated has ever called me cute. "Cute?" I exclaimed, not sure I wanted such a label. "Why, honey?" "Well, you're such an engineer. You need to focus on people, not just technology." She gave my remark a little time to sink in. She then added, "I'm working on being more socially active too. I called you cute because you blush easily. It's the 70s, everything is free and buoyant. Possibility." She waved her arms around and said, "Elsewhere, I might even be sunbathing topless, or even naked." I was stunned. I think my jaw actually dropped at her last remark. I sat on my lounge chair, fully aware of M's long, slender legs and the shadows under her partially unbuttoned blouse. "Do you have a girlfriend?" asked M. She lay with her eyes closed, enjoying the sun. I could almost hear her body soaking up the early summer sun. I thought about how to answer this question. Finally, I said, yeah, sort of, I guess, in Boston. Her name is Megan. We're starting to get serious. Okay, Im said. I love that you have a girlfriend. It's like you came to California and met me with pre-approval. Are you only dating her? I understood the question, but hesitated, answering, I don't know. I mean, the topic has never come up. I paused and looked at Em. There was a slight smile on her lips. Are you having sex? She asked in an even tone. Now I was confused. This girl was going too far. Directness had its limits. I didn't think engineers were supposed to know about sex at all. This is not a topic that was ever discussed in my childhood and rarely among my colleagues. I decided to tell the truth. I said, no, we had a little fun, but that's it. I think Megan wants to take things slow. Em nodded. After a pause, I asked, boyfriend? Em said, yeah, kind of like that. We haven't known each other for long. She smiled mysteriously again and added, he's from the eastern part of the country, from the Boston area. I didn't catch the gist of the conversation, so I asked, oh, really? Where does he work? Em laughed and said, digital devices. It's you, fool. She opened one eye and looked at me sideways, then closed her eyes again and returned to her tan. I was stunned. I remember looking at my watch and thinking that I had only known Em for a little less than 2 hours, and now she was claiming that I was her boyfriend. I examined my feelings. I wasn't against this idea. She was quite nice, friendly, sociable, quite pretty, talkative. Plus, she thought I was cute. I retorted, you're kidding, right? No, not really, and I'm not crazy. I'd love to have you as a boyfriend, but no commitment, no exclusivity, no ownership, no demands other than to just be yourself. Oh, and put away the pocket protector. It spoils your image. She grinned. I looked at my treasured vinyl pocket protector. I pulled the white vinyl case out of my pocket and placed it in my conference bag, making sure it wouldn't fall out. I wore this thing for 7 years. I remember thinking that maybe it was time to get rid of it. I rarely thought about how I looked. Well, just to be clear, girlfriend, I have to catch a plane back to Boston on Saturday morning. I don't have much to offer in terms of a relationship other than that. After a pause, Em asked with her eyes closed, do you think you will continue to participate in such conferences? I thought for a moment before cautiously answering, yes, I guess, but my participation must be approved by my boss, and his boss my trip. This time I was sent. I've never been to anything like this, except for local events in Boston. Em seemed to accept my answer. I wasn't sure what she was thinking. In fact, I thought she was just making fun of me, teasing me, saying that I was her boyfriend. I knew that I was naive and susceptible to such jokes. A few minutes later, Em was dressed again in trousers and a light sweater, and we went inside. The time in the sun seemed to fill her with energy. She was very enthusiastic about the session. She wanted to go to the next day and even talked me into going with her. We sat side by side listening to a young professor from Texas talk about database normalization and search engine optimization. As we sat, Em made a special effort to be in physical contact with me. Not much, only our elbows touched or hips or shoulders. She did this on purpose. When an important remark was made, she would put her hand on my arm. I liked this physical contact. I felt more alert and more focused on Em as the session and our touching continued. In the middle of the day, I bought us both sodas. Em hurried to take us both outside again to catch some more sun, although this time she stayed in her conference clothes. After the break, we listened to another presentation from a guy from Intel about optimizing computer memory. He was late, and we left the conference room only at 15:30. As we walked down the hallway, Em asked, "What are you doing for dinner?" I shrugged and gestured broadly toward the hotel, which I learned had 3 different restaurants, and then said, "I ordered room service last night." She asked, "Do you like Tex-Mex food?" I looked at her with a blank expression. I wasn't sure what she was talking about. Em folded her hands with a look of joy on her face and said enthusiastically, "Come with me. We'll go to the city. Last night, when I was driving around the area, I saw a place that looked interesting. She took my hand again and led me to the large hotel parking lot. She held my hand all the way to the car, often looking at me and watching my reaction to our handshake. I felt comfortable holding her hand, and I could see from her smile that M also liked this contact. We soon joined the stream of rental cars, leaving the hotel in different directions. M drove for about 15 minutes until we pulled into the parking lot of a Mexican restaurant called Casablanca. I trusted her completely because she knew the kitchen. I had never tried Mexican food, and the prospect of trying it made me nervous. The table was filled with chips, salsa, queso, and 2 plates of burritos, enchiladas, and tacos. We shared and laughed, especially when I cautiously tried new dishes. I was out of breath and tears flowing from my eyes, the first time I tried a spicy jalapeno. M burst out laughing on her side of the table when I finally started breathing again, even though it felt like I had burned the entire inside of my mouth. Later, she ordered us sopapillas with vanilla ice cream for dessert. The combination of cinnamon, warm crispy pies, and ice cream was great. "How did you know that I would like vanilla ice cream?" I asked between bites. M smiled and said, "Easy. You're an engineer and a man." "Are we that predictable?" I joked in response. M became philosophical again. "In this case, yes. I would like you to be less predictable. You will achieve greater success in your career if you become more spontaneous and outgoing. At least you have the beginnings of a good sense of humor. Develop it." She smiled at me warmly, and my heart skipped a beat. She had a knack for finding little things that seemed to matter to me. Nothing she said was malicious. On the contrary, I felt that her advice was aimed at my self-development, both personal and professional. We both lived in the hotel where the conference was taking place. M drove us back to the hotel, taking the longer route and showing me around Los Angeles and Hollywood. I had never been to this city before and was grateful for the tour. She told me how different it was from Silicon Valley, where she lived and worked. Returning to the hotel, M suggested taking a walk around its grounds. I readily agreed. She threw my arm over her shoulder, wrapped her arm around my waist, and we slowly strolled through the hotel parking lot and gardens. M stopped at one point and put me in front of her. She was 6 inches shorter than me, but she raised her head and pulled my face towards hers, and we kissed. I thought about kissing her earlier when she was lying on the sun lounger, but then I attributed it to male hormones. She whispered, "Boys and girls should always kiss. A lot. I like the way you kiss." I whispered back, "I love the way you kiss too, and you make my heart beat faster." "Me too," M said. We kissed again and then continued our walk until we found a secluded bench next to a small man-made waterfall and a koi pond. We sat there for over an hour, studying each other. M reluctantly said, "I need to go to bed. You too. Will you be my boyfriend tomorrow?" I replied affirmatively, "Of course. Can we meet for breakfast?" She nodded, and we agreed on which restaurant inside the hotel and what time we would meet. I walked M to her door. After I was sure that there was no one in the corridor, we kissed again, and then I went to my room on another floor. The next morning, M and I found each other and had breakfast together. We became inseparable, taking turns attending each other's sessions throughout the day. We maintained proper behavior, although M often held my hand and squeezed it gently during sessions. M sunbathed by the pool again during her lunch break. This time I took off my shirt and stretched out on the lounge chair next to her. She looked pleased. During the afternoon session, M became noticeably bored. She took my hand and placed it in her lap, rolled up my sleeve, and drew a heart on the inside of my forearm with her ballpoint pen. After she finished, she kissed her fingers and then touched them to her drawing. I was touched by her display of tenderness. After the sessions ended on Thursday, M asked if I would like to go to dinner with her in Marina del Rey. She had never been there and wanted to see it. We slowly made our way along the new I-10 until we reached a scenic area. We walked around, hugging each other, until we found a wonderful restaurant right in the middle of the marina. We booked a table and spent some time together over a glass of wine, holding hands across the table. After dinner, we walked around the marina area some more and then headed back to the hotel. I felt that something was bothering me. Finally, she said, "Let's go to my room. We'll be more comfortable there." We abandoned the car and slowly made our way to the hotel, taking the elevator and walking through a maze of corridors to her door. As she opened the door, she said confidently, "We won't have sex today. We'll just hold each other and kiss a lot." I nodded in agreement with her boundaries, and she pulled me into the room. The next morning, we met again for breakfast. During breakfast, M said quietly, "Thank you for last night. It was especially nice falling asleep in your arms, and for everything else we did." She smiled at me warmly and added, "Do you have any plans for the evening?" "I'm all yours, M, in more ways than you can imagine." We repeated our activities from the previous day, attending conference sessions and sunbathing during our lunch break. M and I touched a lot, romantically and sensually. My concentration was almost entirely on her. Her every movement, touch, whisper, or glance had a new and important meaning for me. Between sessions and during lunch, we discussed the presentations we had attended, analyzing the significance of the breakthroughs presented. My appreciation for M has increased even more. She was brilliant, saw insights, and made conclusions that the speakers themselves did not make. Moreover, she linked several reports, drawing other conclusions about the future of computer technology. When we finished the first afternoon session, M asked me, "Is the next session mandatory for you? Should we skip it and go somewhere special?" I didn't have to think long. "Let's go," I replied. "Where?" "I have elderly relatives about an hour's drive from here. I've been wanting to visit them for a long time. I haven't been with them for over 10 years. I thought we could stop by for an hour or two. I think you'll like them. They're interesting people. They've been living here for a very long time." An hour later, M introduced me to Nancy Bell and Eli. Both were in their late 80s, but appeared healthy, alert, and energetic. I don't remember the exact relationship, but they were delighted to meet Emma and glad she brought her boyfriend with her. They were very hospitable and treated us to herbal tea. M sat next to me, holding my hand tightly for most of the visit. I even thought that we probably looked cute to these old-timers. I learned that they came to San Bernardino in a covered wagon pulled by 6 oxen in the early 1920s. They survived all these decades, raised many children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. We left an hour later, full of impressions. I felt a renewed interest in history, looking at the last 70 years through their unique lens. When we arrived at the hotel, we stopped and had dinner at a Chinese restaurant. Again, we shared dishes, laughing at some of the flavor sensations we tried. M was much more open to experimenting with food than I was. At the end of dinner, M asked, "Do you have to leave tomorrow? Would you stay one day? I'll take you to the airport on Sunday morning. I'll be late too and fly north at the same time." I didn't have a firm commitment to the East Coast, so I said it would be a great idea. I decided to change my return flight ticket directly at the hotel. I didn't know what M had planned, but I would enjoy any time spent with her, even if we just sat by the pool all day. We returned to the hotel, and M invited me to her room. We made love. There was no hesitation, doubt, or hesitation. As soon as the door to her room closed, M turned to me and gently floated into my arms. I wondered if there had ever been greater harmony on the planet. In the dark hours of the morning, M woke me up, and we made love again. After our closeness, we cuddled up to each other again and fell asleep. Saturday morning, we made love again before we showered together and got dressed. At M's suggestion, I checked out of my room and moved my things to her room. We spent most of the day in bed, stopping only for breakfast and lunch at the hotel, and then dinner at a nearby steakhouse. We made love until the morning. We left time between the morning call and our departure for another romantic moment. We made the most of every second, eventually hurriedly showering and checking out of the hotel. With laughter and tears, we hurried to Lax for my morning flight to Boston. Em was supposed to fly to San Francisco after I left. We stood and said goodbye with such passion as I had never known before. When I left, it felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Both Em and I had tears in our eyes. Not only did I sleep on the plane back to Boston, but I also thought about Emma and where our relationship might lead, especially since we were 3,000 miles apart. During the few days that we were together, we didn't talk about the future of our relationship. The only future was asking me to call her soon, keeping in touch the way a guy and a girl do. Given the speed with which it all started, I wondered if our relationship would even survive the next week. The closer the plane got to the East Coast, the more my thoughts also began to turn to Megan, beautiful, conservative, intelligent, and artistic Megan. I liked her too. Thinking about her so closely after my time with them, I felt a disconnect between the East Coast and the West Coast, between Megan and Emma, between the free spirit and the conservative, and between polite, unobtrusive relationships and passionate, sexual relationships. The more I thought about it, the more contrasts I saw. I felt like a bridge between these contrasts. I liked both, maybe even loved them. I decided to postpone the choice as long as possible. Returning to my studio apartment, I found several messages from Megan, the last of which suggested meeting for dinner that evening. I called her back with a rather weak apology for not checking the answering machine while I was in California. She was not very annoyed, and any dissatisfaction quickly passed. After some chatting, we agreed to meet for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Burlington. So 2 hours later, over dinner, I was telling Megan about the ECM conference, wondering how interested she was in what I was talking about. She showed genuine interest. However, technology, engineering, and databases were beyond her interests. I conveniently left out any mention of Emma. Megan shared her week with me. She worked part-time as a tour guide at the Decordova Museum in Lincoln, Massachusetts, just a short drive from her home. Within a week, they had opened a new exhibition for the fall season, and she spoke at length and with enthusiasm about the exhibits and the artists. After dinner, as we left the restaurant, Megan gave me a functional kiss goodbye on the lips. I tried to push her towards something more meaningful, but the moment passed and she got into her car and drove away. We briefly discussed when we would meet again. From the moment we met, Megan was determined to make me into a person who not only appreciated art, but also had a keen taste and ear for its subtleties. Thus, many of our dates took place at concerts, the theater, galleries, poetry readings, author forums, or exhibitions at one of the many museums in and around Boston. Megan was not a false intellectual trying to pretend to be interested in art in order to appear cultured. She was truly cultured, and her interest in art was genuine and sincere. Discovering a new artist or author that she liked brought her great pleasure. I enjoyed my immersion in the world of art, and was glad that Megan expanded my horizons in areas that I had previously neglected when focusing on engineering and technology. I enjoyed most of the activities and places we visited, and I was already starting to develop a new passion for exploring many of the things she suggested to me as new interests. I was open to learning and receptive to the opinions and perspectives Megan shared with me. Megan lived with her parents. She graduated from Wellesley College only 30 minutes from home, and although she lived on campus, I noticed that she maintained an exceptionally close relationship with her mother and younger sister. Megan was the spitting image of her mother, a pleasant and well-bred woman in her 50s who was devoted to the arts as well as several charitable causes in the western suburbs. One of the downsides of Megan living at home was that it severely limited the opportunities for private moments of physical intimacy between us. I wasn't entirely sure that such moments interested her at all. Usually, when we met, I would pick her up at home and bring her back there. If there was an invitation to come over for coffee after our date, then that invitation really meant coffee and nothing more. However, after my time in Los Angeles, I decided to be more assertive in my relationship with Megan and create a more physical and romantic relationship. I needed to know if there was more to our relationship than just a polite kiss or two. On Friday evening after returning from Los Angeles, we attended the opening of a new exhibition at the Stevens Gallery in Cambridge. Then I brought Megan to my small apartment in Lexington. I courted her more tenderly than usual that evening, even giving her flowers and a bottle of the new Pinot Noir I had bought. I was soon rewarded with a passion on her part that I never knew I had. We spent several hours on my couch. The evening turned out to be a turning point. I wasn't sure how attractive Megan was to me or how attracted she was to me. The next day, I was greeted by another Megan who hugged and kissed me and was not shy about showing her affection for me in front of her family. My relationship with her family also changed. Suddenly, I became increasingly involved in Megan's family events: her sister's birthday, a family dinner at some exclusive club, a night out on a family friend's gorgeous yacht, even her mother's birthday. Of course, the opposite is also true. Megan began to play a more prominent role in my family's life. There was more physical intimacy between Megan and I, which made me very happy, and I was happy to discover that she was happy about it too. About a month after I returned from Los Angeles, we took our relationship to the next level in my apartment. Shy Megan turned out to be a passionate person who could become almost wild during sex. I was her first, but after that she was ready to try everything. After that, our relationship changed even more deeply. We both secretly assumed that in the near future we would get married and start a family. In fact, over the next couple of months, Megan and I became the official couple that everyone, her family and mine, had a long-term future with. I knew we were getting married soon when I was alone at my parents' house, and my mother started talking about giving some of her jewelry to Megan. My mother would only do this if Megan was to be part of our family for many years to come. So a couple of months later, after consulting with my parents, I gave my grandmother's engagement ring to be customized to fit Megan's finger. I decided to wait for a special occasion and chose Christmas Eve. I was invited to a big dinner at Megan's house. The TV in their living room allowed for the distraction of a few football games throughout the day. Finally, I caught Megan and took her to the empty living room while the rest of the family was in the kitchen or watching TV. "Megan," I began as she looked at me intently, "you make me very happy, and I think I make you happy. I think we make a good couple. Megan, will you marry me?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a shiny ring. Megan let me put the ring on her finger, kissed me with renewed passion, and then screamed at the top of her lungs that she agreed. "Yes, yes, yes," she screamed, and we hugged again. The noise attracted the rest of the family, who surrounded us and continued to congratulate us all day. I felt happy and knew I had made the right decision. At Christmas, we brought both families together at my parents' house in Dillon for an impromptu engagement party just for family members. By the time all the aunts, uncles, cousins, and other relatives from both sides came to congratulate us, more than 60 people had visited us wishing us happiness. We had a great time being the center of attention. Once the holidays were over, Megan and her mother threw themselves into wedding planning. I agreed with their decision to have a big wedding. In my opinion, it was a big party, and if they wanted to spend money on it, that was fine with me. I made it clear that I would be available for any wedding, from a huge reception to a simple ceremony at a local courthouse in the presence of close family members. The spring and summer months flew by at incredible speed. Sometimes I was asked my opinion on how the invitations looked or whether I liked this or that table decoration. By the end of summer, the first wedding gifts began to arrive. It all became more and more real, but I remained calm and did not allow the anxiety about the approaching event to overwhelm me. At the end of August, more than 300 of our closest friends and relatives gathered for our wedding. We used a congregational church in Concord, Massachusetts for the ceremony and had a huge tent set up on Megan's parents' spacious property for the reception. Live music provided entertainment, and approximately 30 waiters and bartenders constantly served food and drinks to the crowd throughout the afternoon and evening. Out of respect for their neighbors, the Winston family ended the event around 10 p.m. Megan and I, along with about 30 of our real friends, then had an after-party at my friend Bob's house in Bedford. Bob had a small pool in which we all swam, sang, had fun, and made noise until late at night. We finally ended the party around 3 in the morning. Megan and I went to my apartment. We were so exhausted that we just collapsed into bed. Over the winter, Megan and I moved into a larger apartment in Lexington. I could almost walk to work. Megan continued her volunteer work just a few miles from our home at the Decordova Museum. She also helped her mother organize a benefit ball for the American Cancer Society. In the end, I even bought myself a tuxedo. Matt, we need to talk. Megan confidently told me one Saturday afternoon in early spring. I realized that she had been having some thoughts in her head for the past week, but even when I asked her about it, she dismissed her worries, saying that it was nothing special. I had a heightened sensitivity to phrases like "we need to talk" because every time I thought that Megan might find out about my ongoing relationship with Emma, despite all my caution. Megan led me into our new living room. I felt comfortable in this room, which was a mix of old and new pieces of furniture that Megan and I bought together. We both sat down on the sofa. Megan took my hand in hers and squeezed it gently. My anxiety has subsided a little. "I'm going back to school," Megan announced. Inside, I breathed a sigh of relief. Out loud, I asked, "Tell me what you mean." "I want to do something more significant for the world than just be a museum guide and do charity work. Now, with my education, the most I can do is some kind of clerical work." What was I thinking about when I chose a degree in art? Megan rolled her eyes. "To teach or work in a school, I need at least a master's degree in education, and to work at a university, a doctorate in art. But even that is not what I need. I don't want to teach or work as a museum guide." She took a deep breath and said, "I want to become a doctor, or at least a physician's assistant." "Wow!" I exclaimed out loud. "You've really thought this through." Megan took a glossy folder from a drawer on the coffee table. "I went into town to talk to an advisor at Simmons College about their program. I looked at other places, but decided on the health school at Simmons. My advisor thinks that if I start this summer and take on an extra course load, some courses, I can complete the physician assistant program in 2.5 years. I want to make sure you agree before you apply." "Are you sure?" I asked. The more I get into it, the more excited I get. The tone of her voice rose in obvious excitement. She flipped through a few pages of the brochure and placed a list of courses in front of me. "This summer and throughout my first year, I will be taking a lot of basic courses: anatomy, physiology, chemistry, microbiology, statistics, and psychology. After that, practical training and patient care courses will begin, perhaps with a few electives to specialize. If I want to go further and become a doctor, they have all the necessary connections with local schools and hospitals." I thought for a minute and said, "Megan, I'll support you in this, but I don't want you to deceive yourself. Just a few months ago, we were talking about starting a family in a couple of years. Have you forgotten about that conversation?" "No, no," she insisted. "I'm just not going to have kids this year or next. After I graduate, I think we'll have time for all of this. I'm just putting it off for a while." She looked at me, waiting for my approval of her plan. "Have you spoken to your parents, to your mother?" "No. Mom will just try to talk me out of it. For her, my work at the museum and maybe one charity event a year is enough. I understand that I have long felt an internal burning, a desire to do something more significant in my life, and I'm sure this is exactly what I need." "How will this affect us?" I asked, although I already imagined that our social time would be reduced, which I was already starting to get used to. Megan answered slowly, "I think a lot. I will become a student again. This apartment will become my dorm. I will no longer be in charge of cooking or laundry like before. Our social life will suffer. I will certainly try to devote more attention to you, more quality time." She smiled at me and continued, "I don't know how it will happen next. Until I start, I won't be able to say for sure." I agreed. Something inside me told me that Megan was taking a step towards a more meaningful life. I just hoped she could handle the pressure and workload of being a wife and a student at the same time. I knew she would put her whole heart and mind into this. In June, Megan began commuting daily to classes in the Fenway area of Boston. My sophisticated, intelligent, artistic wife became a student again. Heels and dresses were replaced by jeans, a sweatshirt, and sneakers. Evening discussions of art and literature gave way to brief recaps of physiology or anatomy courses, as well as requests for help with exam preparation. I myself began to learn the names of bones and muscles. I haven't had too much time to think about Megan's career change. One of the digital signal processors that my small company made became a bestseller. Digital devices skyrocketed to success. All of the world's air traffic control systems, air forces, navies, and airports suddenly couldn't get enough of our radar processors. We did not have time to hire new employees. I was promoted to database program manager after my boss moved to the production department. My salary has increased over the years, part of it in the form of a generous bonus in company shares. Although I was not yet in the center of things, I knew that my work was the key to the future of the company. I redoubled my efforts at work, and with it, the number of working hours and weekends spent in the office increased. To my great joy, I was able to obtain a separate company computer for my program, an IBM System 370. This huge computer occupied the corner of one of the buildings on our campus and required separate air conditioning and maintenance. However, a dedicated computer allowed us to quadruple our research efficiency while also selling excess computer time on the timeshare market. We were trying to create the perfect database machine. One of the requirements of the new job was business travel. I began to travel around the country, meeting with those who were doing database research or working in related computer interface fields. At home, Megan seemed to enjoy my increased involvement in work and frequent business trips. She admitted that this reduces her feelings of guilt for devoting so much time to her studies. As is her nature, she signed up for extra courses every semester. We both agreed that this time in our lives needed to be dedicated to career growth. We tried to spend quality time together every weekend. Due to her exams or my travel schedule, this was not always possible. In such cases, we chose another evening to make up for lost time. We took day trips around New England and tried to do fun things like canoeing on the Charles River, visiting mansions in Newport, exploring the Mystic Seaport Museum, or walking along the beach along the Maine coast and eating lobster rolls. Time spent with Megan was always romantic, although I suspect neither of us got enough time from each other. Our intimate relationships suffered due to changes in our work and school life, and with it, our sense of closeness with Megan. I tried to figure out if we were in trouble and came to the conclusion that we weren't. I knew that our life was a temporary situation that would end when she completed her program. Besides, I had enough worries at work. When we looked at our few close friends, we seemed happier than most of them. A couple of our friends got divorced after just a couple of years of marriage. Others have struggled with the challenges of living with two incomes and career ambitions. We were unique at this point in having Megan return to school, but we knew we would eventually face the same challenges that our peers face. Our friends who already had children didn't do any better. Well-educated women who supported the feminist movement of the 60s found themselves trapped at home with a bunch of children under the age of 6. I had to admit that the situation seemed unfair unless the husbands helped in some way. Without interaction with adults or anything meaningful to do, not only did my skills atrophy, but my soul also withered. Some women were able to break free from these child-rearing shackles, but many seemed hopelessly doomed to a world of diapers, potty training, and the emptiness of being a housewife. I started running. I needed exercise, and running became a popular hobby at the time. At first, I thought that running a 2-mile loop around our apartment and the surrounding streets was a great achievement, until one day, after finishing my run, I met two neighbors returning from a 10-mile run. After being so clearly outdone, I decided to increase the distance of my runs. I found a group at work that liked to run at lunchtime. We had showers and a small gym at work, and a convenient route of several miles on the roads and trails of Lexington and Concord. Within a few months, I was running 5 to 7 miles at lunchtime, had lost 20 pounds, and was in better shape than ever. Some weekends, depending on Megan's schedule, I would run 10 or 12 miles or participate in a 10-kilometer race in some nearby town, usually in support of a needy charity. I started to accumulate a whole arsenal of t-shirts from these races. The Boston Marathon was the highest achievement for runners of that time. I decided it would be fun to run the entire marathon. I increased my daily runs to 10 to 12 miles, and on weekends to 18 miles or more. I wasn't particularly fast, but I was fairly steady, maintaining a pace of between 7 and 8 minutes per mile. As we got closer to mid-April, our group of marathon training colleagues began making weekly trips to one or another part of the marathon route from Hopkinton to Boston. We soon knew the entire route, including the terrible hills in Newton and near Boston College. Megan supported me in my preparation, sometimes accompanying me to the start of my runs on the weekends, and then returning home to study. She became my cheerleader on the third Monday of April, when the day of the marathon arrived. She drove me to Hopkinton, and then drove to Framingham to meet me with my special energy blend. I think there were over 20,000 runners that day. I couldn't even cross the starting line from my position in the crowd for 7 minutes after the buzzer sounded. That's when I turned on my watch. The crowd dispersed quite quickly. I found Megan in Framingham and then Wellesley and Newton as she moved along the route. She cheered and shouted, as expected, as I ran past, snatching the bottle of my special mixture from her hands. I finished with an official time of 3:20, less than 8 minutes per mile. I struggled on the hills despite my mixture and made it to the finish line in a mixture of pain and jubilation. I cried. I was so overwhelmed with emotion from the achievement. I think I depleted all the electrolytes in my body. Megan found me and wrapped me in a blanket. I received my souvenir medal and went home feeling great. I was on a huge high, an endorphin high. I finished with a decent time. Megan shared my joy, and to my surprise and delight, she threw me a surprise party that evening. A parade of our friends arrived with gag gifts, celebrating my first marathon. Surprisingly, I thought that her efforts in organizing the holiday were one of the warmest and most touching moments in our marriage at that time. I felt so much love for her and from her. All night I could not let her go from me. A couple of my friends even joked that we were clearly still on our honeymoon. After the party, Megan and I made love. It was one of the peak moments of our relationship at that time. Every semester, when finals rolled around, I declared myself Megan's slave. I began my servitude back in the summer, when Megan returned to school, cooking and keeping the apartment in extraordinary order. I did all the shopping, organized our modest communication, and tried to find all possible ways to make her life easier. I went to the local office supply store and made sure she was stocked with every possible school supply. New sticky notes, markers, notepads, and more pens and pencils than we could use in a lifetime. By the end of the fall semester, which ended in December, I was even more ready to become her servant. I had romantic dinners carefully prepared for her return home after classes or study sessions. I bought her warm, fluffy pajamas, but only allowed her to wear them after a full-body massage using heated oils. Another evening, I prepared a bubble bath for her with candles floating in the water. I dried her with a new, soft, warm towel. We made love. I cooked meals that she liked, although I cheated a few times by ordering takeout from a few of our favorite restaurants. I made sure her car always had a full tank of gas and was clean, and found dozens of other ways to be helpful and supportive during exam periods. There was no task too small if it could make her happy. In the spring, right after Megan took her final exam, I grabbed her the next day and we flew to the Virgin Islands. I didn't tell her where we were going until we arrived at the airport, but I made sure she packed all the necessary clothes for our vacation. We sailed, snorkeled, swam, sunbathed, and made love over and over again. It was a wonderful holiday. The people at the hotel thought we were on our honeymoon and did special things for us. We did not try to dissuade them, although by that time we had been married for almost 2 years. I saw Emma again just a month after we first met in Los Angeles. After returning from the ACOM conference, I told my boss and colleagues about the talks I attended and my recommendations. After further research, we realized that at Ampex Corporation in Redwood City, California, Larry Ellison was doing important work on relational databases. My boss asked me to fly to San Francisco to meet with Ellison and another researcher at another company to see if there were any synergies between their interests and those of digital devices. I talked to Em about once a week, usually for an hour at a time. Our conversations were varied and covered everything from our technical work to how we got along with our parents. In fact, Em even helped me feel comfortable talking about Megan and how I felt about her. She offered tips for developing our relationship, which I tried, such as giving Megan a corsage and her favorite wine after one of the gallery events, and a few weeks later, ideas for improving our sex life. Her suggestions were spot on and deepened my appreciation for our friendship. During our conversations, Em always found a way to call me her boyfriend with a capital P. I knew she loved that word ever since we were intimate. Her use of the term made me feel guilty, not because I had a similar role to Megan, but because there were so many things I had to do to earn that title. I let her comments pass, but I thought that when I saw her again, I would need to make sure that she understood all the things that I could not do for her in this role, 3,000 miles away. Before our trip to Redwood City, I thought our conversations would eventually fade away and we would become fond memories for each other, a brief fling at a computer conference when we were both far from home and alone. My second trip to the West Coast changed all that. Em met me at the San Francisco airport upon arrival of my flight. She threw herself into my arms and showered me with kisses right at the airport in the area before the boarding gate. She took me home to cook dinner, but as soon as we entered her apartment, we were already making love on her bed. Instead of cooking, she took me to her favorite Mexican restaurant. I remember she put on a long dress with no underwear underneath. This time I didn't use the hotel. I just called and canceled after Em insisted I stay with her. She had a small smile on her face, promising that we were in for some sexy fun. When I wasn't doing the main purpose of my trip, Em and I were making love again, sleeping, cuddling, or eating together. Three things that came up in our conversations during this trip changed our relationship forever, although if just one of them had been different, we might have changed the course we were on. In the end, these things remained the same and became the basis of our relationship. First, during dinner on M's terrace, the second night in Palo Alto, she again used the term boyfriend to refer to me. I explained to her that when she uses this term, I feel guilty, mainly because I am not there to do things for her or be with her all the time. I also mentioned the developing relationship with Megan, which seemed to be reaching a new and desirable level. Em sat on my lap and gently held my face in her hands. Matthew, I know you're thousands of miles away most of the time. I'm not expecting a normal guy. You're just what I need. She laughed and added, if you were around all the time, we probably would have had a fight and broken up. We kissed for a moment, and then Em added, when I call you my boyfriend, I mean it. I'm not dating anyone else, although I know you'd tell me you could. I nodded in agreement with her assumption. You're the best man I've ever met. I knew it the first 10 seconds I met you when I asked if I could sit next to you at lunch that day. I think it was the chemistry or the pheromones or something like that, but I immediately realized that you are the one. But, I can't be the one if I'm 3,000 miles away. I knew that too, and that's okay. I accept you for who you are, where you are, what you are, how you are, all of it. But, Em put her finger on my lips to stop my flow of words. At that moment, the second part of our conversation took place, which surprised me with its frankness and forever cemented our relationship. She said urgently, Matthew, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you because it's important. She looked into my eyes and gently kissed the tip of my nose. She continued, I don't care about being the other woman. In fact, I actually enjoy it. I was shocked, and I think my eyes went wide in surprise at her statement. I know you have Megan. I also know that you will soon make love to her, then get engaged and married. I don't care. She paused and added, well, I actually do. I care about your happiness. I want you and Megan to be happy, very happy. I'm not here to ruin anything. On the contrary, I'm here to help you build something good. I said, but our relationship, our time together, isn't it? I gestured towards M's bedroom. Oh, I don't want to stop making love to you. And I hope you don't either. If it's important to you, we can stop. I still want to be in a relationship with you, but it can be whatever you want, provided it doesn't interfere with your relationship with Megan. I carefully studied M's face, looking for signs of sarcasm or jealousy, but found nothing of the kind. M added thoughtfully after a moment, "Of course, I understand that our relationship will change your relationship with Megan. It would be foolish to think otherwise. There are ways it can change in a bad way, and there are ways it can change in a good way. I want it to be only good and positive changes. I don't want you to think about me, about us, about our relationship in any context that does not bring something good to what you are. You and Megan build together. Any other girl would be jealous or possessive or something," I said in a tone of amazement, testing her to make sure she really meant what she said. "But I'm not any other girl," she said insistently. "Maybe it's the way I was raised and the fact that I grew up for the last 10 or 12 years with hippie parents and a liberal circle of friends. I don't feel jealous. And what I'm trying to tell you is, I'm happy for you and Megan. I'm also greedy enough to want a piece of you too, but only a piece that you can afford to give and give in a way that doesn't take away something from what you and Megan are building together. But you will meet other people. You will date and fall in love too," I said affirmatively, hoping that she would accept the idea. "Perhaps," she replied, "but I don't feel an urgent need to look for someone because I have you. I can't live up to all your expectations. This trip is rare, especially so soon after we met. I may not be able to come here for months or years. You will have expectations of me that I will not be able or want to meet, even when we are together. 1 or 2 phone calls a week, even every day, will not strengthen our relationship. Oh, I'll fantasize about you a lot, but I'm realistic enough to know that I can keep things within reason. And I repeat what I already said. I am happy with what you give, be it a lot or a little." I looked at M, wondering what the future held for her, what the future held for us. M said slowly and hesitantly, "If you want to say that this is the end, that you don't want to continue further, then I understand. I, I don't know what I'll do, but I can deal with this." I didn't feel like she was trying to manipulate me with her statement. It was just what she felt. "Oh no," I objected. "That's not what I was trying to tell you. I care about you very much. I want to keep seeing you. I'll find a way. We'll find a way to keep in touch, meet from time to time. I just want to make sure you agree that it will be every now and then." M cupped my face in her hands and kissed me again. We spent a few minutes tenderly expressing our feelings. It was then that the third part of our conversation took place, which changed our lives forever. 2 short phrases spoken between us changed everything. M finally pulled away and looked into my eyes. She whispered, "Matthew, I love you." Without thinking, I responded with genuine emotion, "Emma, I love you too." We had never used those words towards each other before, and I hadn't even said them to Megan, although we both knew they were implied. To me, those words were a commitment and a promise of commitment. From now on, M will always be in my thoughts, no matter if she was 3 inches away or 3,000 miles away. I just had to accept, as M had already done, that this would be an unusual relationship. I learned more about love from Emma during the rest of my visit. We talked about the feelings associated with love, about emotions, about what love means to us, including commitment. We also talked more about not being exclusive, although I didn't feel like M would seek the more permanent, intimate relationship she deserved. Over dinner at one of our favorite restaurants, we also talked about my relationship with Megan and how to make it more meaningful. Emma surprised me with her directness when talking about how to deepen this relationship. She spoke candidly about how to express her feelings for Megan. She also encouraged me to be clear about how I felt about Megan, regardless of how I felt about her. She wanted me to love 2 women, her and Megan. I told her that I felt weird talking about Megan to her, especially when it came to creating a loving and physical relationship. Emma laughed and assured me that there was no topic I couldn't talk to her about in a supportive way. Based on this challenge, we began to discuss topics that might be taboo between us. We defined our boundaries and laughed a lot during this conversation. I stayed another Friday, even though that was supposed to be my day to return. I had dinner planned with Megan on Saturday night, so I called her to tell her I would come, but would be on a plane most of Saturday. She seemed unusually silent, but did not ask why I stayed one day longer. After this trip, Em and I continued our romance over the phone. She also taught me phone sex, which I had heard about, but which she was particularly adept at. We both expanded our vocabulary in the areas of sexual actions and feelings. I later learned that she had done research on the topic, talked to friends, and even trained on her own before involving me in these juicy long-distance activities. I arrived in Silicon Valley again just after Thanksgiving. I worked for 3 days and spent the fourth just making love to Em. I stayed with her again. It was so comfortable to be around her and even more comfortable to be in love. Em always asked how my relationship with Megan was going, often offering ideas on how to better express my feelings for her or broach sensitive topics. Thanks to her ideas, I think my relationship with Megan progressed faster than if I had acted on my own. On one of our fall trips, Em and I went out to dinner. She tested my feelings for Megan. Judging by my answers, she strongly recommended that I ask Megan to marry me. She told me exactly how to do it before Christmas, and I followed her instructions to the letter. Em said her heart is filled with love for us. I went back to Redwood City for a week in February and then again in March. To my surprise, Em discovered that she needed to go to Boston for a conference in May. Somehow, we managed to see each other much more often than I initially expected. On one of these trips, I bought Em a 1-carat diamond ring. I couldn't ask her to marry me, and as I guessed correctly, she didn't want it. Instead, I gave her a ring as a symbol of our friendship, love, and our commitment to a long-lasting relationship. Emma cried with happiness. Over the course of that year, my relationship with Megan went from friendship to boyfriend to fiancé to husband. Emma guided me, giving me helpful tips on behaviors and ideas that would appeal to Megan. My idea of the other woman was completely at odds with how Em behaved. She was not someone evil who was trying to drive a wedge into the relationship. I think if I suggested and Megan agreed, Em would come and join us at some point. Em often told me not to call her for a week or two, trying to get me to focus my attention and affection on Megan. I followed her instructions, but continued to think about Em every day. In the first month after meeting Emma, I decided that I could not share her with anyone. I didn't have a friend close enough for me to tell him about her. As my relationship with Megan progressed, I was even more glad that I decided to keep them all to myself. I watched with interest the whirlwind romance between my two colleagues. Both were older and married, but for several months they would sneak out during lunch to a local motel several times a week. Everyone at work knew about it, and rumor had it that they were even caught in flagrante in one of the conference rooms after work. 6 months later, it was all over and the woman left the company. It seems that one of the spouses guessed what was happening. Kevin, the man involved in the affair, admitted to me that he was tormented by guilt over his actions. He wanted to destroy himself for violating the trust he had created in his marriage. He was the initiator of this affair, gradually seducing Sheila, a pretty secretary from the stenography department. I told so many lies, he admitted to me one day in our small dining room. I asked him why he did it and if he could have just not lied. Kevin looked at me strangely, but still didn't answer my questions. A few months later, someone told me that he was having an affair again, this time with a pretty clerk from the accounting department. I expected a wave of guilt to wash over me for keeping my mind racing between the two women I loved, but nothing happened. I even worried about my possibly sociopathic behavior, but I didn't change. I had no regrets about the way my life turned out. After Megan and I got engaged, and just after returning from a trip to the West Coast where I saw Emma again, I sat down and focused on my thoughts. I loved both women. I even wrote down on paper my feelings for each of them. I did not see any shortcomings in one of them that I compensated for by dating the other. I didn't think of them that way. They were both unique and different from each other in many ways. I just loved being with both of them and loving them. Emma was right. I fell in love twice at the same time. On another trip to California, Emma and I spent a day and night at the Seal Rock in near Sutro Heights Park in San Francisco. We walked along the beach for several hours and then sat in a busy cocktail bar overlooking the Pacific Ocean and chatted. At first, Em was in a carefree mood, a free-spirited spirit, seemingly without any concern for the consequences of our developing romance. She spoke about how we are all being brainwashed into believing in monogamy, exclusivity, and marriage, firmly declaring that she does not share these prejudices. She was so convincing that I even considered living with Megan without getting married, but this thought immediately disappeared as soon as I realized that Megan would never agree to this. I asked him if she felt guilty about what was happening between us. She looked at me strangely and replied, "To feel guilty, you need to do something bad and consider it wrong. Do you think we're doing something wrong?" "No," I answered firmly, "but other people might think so, like Megan." Em thought for a while. She then said slowly and firmly, "Matthew, I never want you to lie about us to anyone." She stopped and stood in front of me. "Guilt comes from lies and deception. I don't want this to happen to you, Megan, or me. If that means everything will be revealed and there will be bad feelings, then so be it. If that means we have to end our relationship, then so be it. Above all, let us value the truth in everything we go through." After processing her words, I said, "You're right." She smiled at me, and we kissed in the cold ocean air. I stood next to Megan, fascinated, watching the doctor handle the baby's slippery body. Megan squeezed my hand, which by this point was almost numb from the pressure. I alternated between feeding her small pieces of ice and massaging her back during contractions. The doctor lifted his head with a smile on his face and said, "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. You have a beautiful girl to add to your family." The baby made a gurgling sound, followed by her timid cry of protest, marking the birth. The doctor carefully lifted the naked creature while the nurse wiped away the fluids that covered her purple body with a cloth. He looked at his watch and solemnly announced, "This young lady was born at exactly 3:33 in the afternoon, April 24th, 1985. The doctor handed the child over to the nurse with great care. The nurse wrapped the baby in a towel and moved her to a nearby table for cleansing. I studied every detail with the practical eye of an engineer. I thought this was the highest form of bioengineering. I was present at the birth of my first daughter, but even so, it was a significant event. Megan was still holding my hand tightly. She smiled tiredly. Beads of sweat ran down her cheeks, despite the coolness in the operating room. I leaned over and kissed her forehead. "You did very well, Megan," I told her. "Well, we won't do this again," she said loudly. Even the nurse was surprised by her decisive statement. I nodded in acceptance of her decision. Years earlier, we planned the perfect schedule for our family. We were on the right track in terms of having children. This was our second child. Elena Beth Carter was born 2 years earlier. We agreed to name this girl Sarah Alice Carter. Both girls had their grandmother's names as their middle names. The doctor looked up as he continued to stitch up Megan's episiotomy. She winced once and squeezed my hand one last time. "Sorry," he exclaimed, "almost finished." "Not really," Megan told the doctor flirtatiously. "You must perform the procedure on my husband." I made a gesture with my hand, covering my groin area from a possible blow. Dr. Charles Badry laughed. "Megan, bring him to my office sometime, and we'll take care of this. Today, the whole day is dedicated to you." The nurse swaddled the child and brought a small bundle to us. She placed it in Megan's outstretched arms. The child immediately began to instinctively look for the breast. Megan looked surprised. Dr. Badre was not only our family doctor and, in this case, the person we trusted with the birth of our 2 children, but he was also Megan's boss. She had been his medical assistant for the past 5 years, worked both in his office in Wellesley and in the clinic he ran in Roxbury 1.5 days a week. After he completed his work on Megan, he reached for the child. "Let's see what we have here," he said. With great care, he turned the tossing baby around on Megan's stomach, carefully examining every inch of her body and gently pressing and probing parts of her small torso. He made several movements, testing the reflexes in her feet and back. In 3 quick movements, he swaddled the baby again and returned her to Megan's arms. "I think this baby is as perfect as a leaner," he announced. Megan and I both breathed a sigh of relief. "You guys make healthy and pretty kids." He paused and looked around at the nurses who stood ready to help Megan. He told them, "Take care of her. She is more valuable to me than my right hand." He turned to Megan and added, "I'll clean myself up and visit a couple more patients. I'll come see you before I leave the hospital." With that, he stretched to his full height of 6 feet 6 inches and quickly walked out of the operating room. One of the nurses finished covering Megan and adjusted the gurney she was giving birth on. "We will leave you on this gurney until you return to your room. Now they will take you to postnatal care for a couple of hours to make sure everything is in order. You know the procedure." She turned to me and said, "You can take off your robe if you want and go back to your wife." I nodded. We were already going through all the stages of labor and recovery just a few weeks ago, even though it was our second child. Before I left the room, I stopped and looked at Megan and the baby. She held the sleeping newborn to her chest in a maternal and protective gesture. I felt a sense of relief and gratitude. I was so glad that Megan and Sarah Alice were not harmed during the birth process. Moreover, I felt lucky to have such a family and the love that we shared. I remembered this moment so that I could share it with her later, or even 4 months from now, on our 9th wedding anniversary. I then went to the locker room and changed out of the hospital gown. Before returning to Megan, I found a payphone and made 3 calls using the calling card. The first to Megan's mother, who was anxiously awaiting news of the birth while she was with a leaner at our house. The second to my mother, who was also awaiting news of the birth of her new granddaughter. And finally, I called Emma to let her know everything went well. Each of them, in their own way, was excited about the birth and offered us both relief that it was over and congratulations. As I walked down the hospital hallway from the men's locker room to find Megan, I thought about the years we spent together. Except for the 9 months since our wedding, Megan has always been immersed in her medical career. First in her 3-year studies leading to her physician assistant degree and certification, and then for the past 5 years as Dr. Badre's assistant. Megan was an exceptional person, and exactly the type of person you would want to see around you. She was constantly learning. Any patient with an unknown diagnosis worried her. She would sometimes stay late at work to care for a patient and even make the occasional home visit, especially when it came to the pediatric cases she was asked to take on. Dr. Badre increasingly trusted her with more responsibility as she proved her worth. He often told me that she was better with patients than he was. Megan laughed in self-irony, but we all knew he was right. Her concern for her patients was deeper, and she was often more emotionally involved in their plight than her aging mentor. I was proud of Megan and told her so often. She enjoyed my praise as well as the comments of others. Given that she was keen to distance herself from the life of a housewife, I thought she had gone as far in the other direction as she could while still having children. With 2 solid incomes, Megan and I bought a house in Wellesley 4 years ago. This spacious modern-style home was located a block from the local college in one of the best areas. The college became a source of bright young girls who were happy to look after a 2-year-old girl. Most of the time Megan worked at Dr. Badre's Wellesley office. She was only 5 minutes from home. I rated our marriage as average in terms of compatibility and disagreements. Our career-oriented marriage quickly brought an end to the honeymoon. At first, Megan and I were immersed in work or school. As a result, the growing intimacy between us quickly reached a plateau and then slowly solidified around our professional lives. We both found fault with how much time the other devoted to work or study. Coming to harmony turned out to be much more difficult than talking about it. Oddly enough, when I went on business trips, Megan never complained. I attributed this to the fact that she could come and go as she pleased without having to synchronize her schedule with mine. It was only when I was nearby, working late and minutes from home, that she found it a problem. From my perspective, Megan spent an inordinate amount of time in college, either in class, in the lab, or working with patients at one of the clinics where she interned. Her studies often dragged on until the evening, and more than once it happened that I found her already asleep in bed when I came home. We tried to synchronize my long days with her schedule, but as soon as I got used to her schedule, it would change again, and we would have to start all over again. After Elena arrived, I began to try harder to come home at the agreed time. For the first year and a half of my daughter's life, I didn't know how to handle her. But when she turned 2, she seemed to recognize Daddy and sat quietly enough for me to read her and her sister a bedtime story. At least at this stage, she was a calm child. Megan's other complaints often centered on my lack of attention to small chores around the house. After countless discussions about this problem, I found a home handyman who regularly came in and worked on home improvements and various small jobs. The young man's work seemed to pacify Megan, and peace reigned in the house again. Megan and I struggled with the issue of intimacy. As an engineer and recent software developer, I knew I didn't have a romantic streak. As a result, I became a student of ways to maintain our relationships, especially in a romantic way. As promised, Emma has been a valuable source of ideas and information in this area. At her urging, I found out where the local flower shops and card shops were. I started keeping a calendar of special dates, always trying to come up with a new one whenever I felt the moment was right. She also encouraged me to have date nights with Megan from time to time. On the nights when I came home at a reasonable hour, and when Megan wasn't busy with classes, labs, or study groups, we enjoyed a few hours of deep conversation together. We mostly shared what was going on at work or school, or discussed how to balance time between our families, especially in terms of having mothers see and care for our daughters Sarah and Elena. We both had siblings who were also a source of conversation, and Megan continued to show an interest in art, although at a much lesser level due to her studies. Our mothers decided they wanted to spend at least one day a week babysitting. We usually rescheduled the day depending on my travel schedule or Megan's schedule. If anything, it made it easier to deal with other childcare options, such as college students. I began to insist that we find a more mature full-time nanny or governess. We could afford it, and there was enough room in the house for one more adult. Any spontaneous intimacy that might have suffered from this has long since become a pleasant memory. Mark Dalton, one of my longtime work friends, knew Megan and me well enough to have seen the flames of romance fade in a marriage, especially after children arrived. He was at the same stage of life with his wife and family. One day he complained to me about his life. "Don't you feel deceived? You find the hottest thing, you marry her, and then you destroy each other, the love disappears, the kids and the house take up all your attention, and the world seems like crap." Usually optimistic, his rhetorical question surprised me. Although I answered him with a couple of general phrases, his statements made me think. That evening, playing alone with Sarah and Elena, I wondered if I felt cheated, as Mark put it. Maybe I was a naive optimist at that moment. However, I saw our marriage as a living organism, something that changes and develops over time. Megan and I even talked about how our relationship has changed over the years. If we were in a downturn, I knew there would be an upturn soon. I thought it was rare for anything to be in balance. Instead, we moved in a kind of crazy dance with each other, and with all the other factors influencing our lives, shifting our attention to those places that needed it most. I realized that our relationship was just one such area that needed attention. There were many other relationships to focus on. Megan's parents, her siblings, my siblings, her friends, my friends, our mutual friends, her work, my work, and so on, including Emma. We could wallow in the dysfunction of our marriage, breaking down and complaining about being deceived, or we could choose to adapt to the changes and not let them destroy our relationship. A friend once shared with me a quote from Otis Maxfield: "Destiny is what life gives you. Purpose is what you do with it." I could live with that thought. I decided to share my thoughts with Mark the next day. When we sat down to lunch and started talking, Mark admitted to me that he had recently had an affair with one of the assistants at the company. I was stunned. Mark never struck me as someone who was into outside relationships. He admitted that it was purely sexual. There was no love or care in the affair, and he felt guilty about it, although he justified his actions by saying that his family life was full of problems, as he put it. For a moment, I thought about telling Mark about Emma, but fortunately, I restrained myself and remained silent. Emma remained my secret. Listening to Mark, I realized how little similarity there was between his affair and my 20-year relationship with Emma. I never sought out Emma because I had a fight with Megan or because I fell out of love with her. On the contrary, I loved Megan. Emma and I loved each other deeply. We were an event in an alternate reality called the West Coast. I still didn't feel guilty about the affair. It was just something that had to be carefully managed so that no one got hurt. And finally, there were no lies in this relationship. I simply allowed it to develop as it developed every time we met. Like Mark and his secretary, Emma and I had a sexual relationship, but my relationship with Emma went much deeper than that. Thinking about Emma, my mind traveled 3,000 miles. I thought for a moment until Mark snapped his fingers in front of my eyes. "Hello, the Earth calls Matt, the Earth calls Matt. Are you here?" He smiled at me. I shook my head and returned to the discussion. If he noticed anything in my confusion, he didn't mention it. 3 years ago, I managed to pull off a small operation at work. After several years of research and development in the database field and becoming an expert in this segment of the industry and its future, I arranged the sale of my entire group, including the data center, to a newly formed company called Oracle Corporation. The company was named after its main product, the Oracle database developed for the CIA, while its founders were still working for Ampex Corporation. Oracle was based in Redwood City, California, near Ampex, where they initially worked on the database. Its CEO was Larry Ellison, an entrepreneur I met many times while working at Digital Devices. Oracle was at the forefront of software technology, exactly where my group and I wanted to be. Instead of competing, we joined. By the time my group was sold, I had a lot of stock options in Digital Devices. Due to the success of the transaction, the company exercised the options. I became the owner of a large fortune overnight, enough to buy out our house in Wellesley and buy a vacation spot on a lake in Maine. As part of the deal, I was able to become head of the Boston branch with a stellar compensation package. Nominally, I reported to the CEO. In fact, I became the president of my own division. Megan was very proud of me. At 32 years old, I have achieved a lot. My database group, including the data center, moved out of the Digital Devices building shortly after the sale. We got our own offices in Burlington, Massachusetts, right along Highway 128. We also began hiring staff. After 6 months, I had about 70 people under me. I became the youngest head of division at Oracle. A year later, the number of employees in my department increased to 200 people. My travel schedule included monthly trips to the West Coast. Occasionally, there would be a conference or special meeting that I needed to go to, but usually these trips would only take 1 or 2 days, rather than the 5 or 6 days I usually spent on the West Coast. Since I was there so regularly, I decided that it would be more profitable for the company to rent me a studio apartment than to pay for hotels. The condo eventually became a second home for me, and I could leave my clothes and toiletries there. I gave Emma the key. Emma and I were sitting at dinner in a small bistro near Stanford University. There were several students and people who looked like professors in the establishment. We both liked the atmosphere around campus, so on many of my trips we walked around the campus, which was located near her apartment. This small Italian restaurant has become our favorite over the years. The owners even knew us by name and always greeted us with enthusiasm. We exchanged stories about our day. I was in meetings all day discussing the development of packaged software solutions based on Oracle data that an increasing number of my clients in New England wanted to implement. We had so many options that it was difficult for me to prioritize which direction to go. My colleagues from other regions faced the same problems. More resources. We all wanted more people and improvements to the product. Emma joined Verbatim 12 years ago when it was just starting out. You could count on one hand the number of people who knew more about digital magnetic media than she did, and she was every one of them's best friends. Moreover, she established herself as an engineer in research and development, becoming vice president of the young company. Over dinner, Emma talked about how Verbatim had been acquired by Eastman Kodak a few months ago. The company was facing difficult times in the highly competitive media market, and this was not improving due to ongoing production problems. Now they have a new brand. However, she said quality control issues showed no signs of improvement. Emma and her team worked to reliably produce 3.5-inch floppy disks with double the storage capacity. She turned the disk over in her hands as if she was looking for inspiration, just holding on to the product. She said, "It's the same chicken and egg situation again, and there are some bad chickens out there. We have to start making drives before companies like Seagate start making drives for computers. Then the price reduction will make the upgrade worthwhile. The worst thing now, however, is that we need to get our quality control in order." I asked, "But when can I get a disk with a capacity of 100 megabytes or gigabytes? Are we that far from it?" She replied, "As for hard drives, you already have 100 megabytes in your computer. It's just not removable media. The industry is moving forward with Moore's law on these things. You'll have a gigabyte hard drive in about a decade, and a 100 gigabyte hard drive a decade after that. It seems like we're improving capacity by a factor of 100 every 10 years, at least in the case of magnetic media." She was spinning a plastic floppy disk between her two hands. She said, "The days of these devices are numbered. They will be replaced by compact discs or CDs, and then probably by some higher density media. Music companies already record an entire album onto one CD. This is about 600 megabytes of capacity, but rewriting capabilities are limited. We will soon launch our brand on the market, but the problem lies in the drives. They are expensive to make, but will become cheaper over time. At first, they will only allow you to write once, but in the 90s, there will be devices that will allow you to read, write, and rewrite CDs." We discussed the implications of various technologies. As storage capacity explodes, many of the limitations of computers will disappear, portability will increase dramatically, and data synchronization will become a challenge, at least within companies. I thought about the possibility of putting the entire databases we were working with on one drive. That would be an achievement. We paid for dinner and went for a walk around campus. There was natural competition between MIT and Stanford, so I launched into a long speech about how I was a spy from the East Coast, sent here to learn all the school's secrets so we could beat them in the rankings. These rankings were something of a farce. However, schools received greater honor if they were superior to another. In any case, Caltech still ranked first among all technical universities. Emma and I walked the 2 miles back to her apartment. She said, "Management is discussing my transfer to the production department." After a long moment of silence as I processed this thought, she added, "That would mean I would have to move to Charlotte, North Carolina." "Wow," I said, trying to express my enthusiasm for her possible move. "I've never been to Charlotte. I heard it's beautiful there." My stomach tightened into a knot. I had never been to Charlotte and had no reason to be within a few 100 miles of this place. If Emma moved there, it would mean the end of our comfortable relationship. I gave her a vague smile, wondering if she had thought about this aspect of the translation. 1,000 other questions flashed through my head. After another long silence, Emma said with a sly smile, "I'm going to give up on moving. This will probably mean I will lose my job." I was surprised. "I'm refusing to move because if I go to Charlotte, I won't be able to see you anymore, or I'll only be able to see you once or twice a year. This will complicate our relationship. I know you'll have to keep coming to California for a while, and if I stay here, we can see each other every few weeks." She smiled and squeezed my hand. "I just try to stay close to my boyfriend. Charlotte won't allow it." "Where will you work? It's not so easy to find a job now, is it?" "There are still a lot of places here that are hiring, especially if you are a proven specialist. I'm thinking about starting to look for a job. Verbatim's constant interruptions are starting to annoy me. We entered the apartment holding hands. I knew I could always be romantic with Emma and that she would appreciate it. Guys do these things. She still liked to use that word when talking about me. I had long ago given up discussing my shortcomings in this role. I was an East Coast bound, married father of two, and couldn't do all the things I thought a guy should do for his girlfriend. She brushed off my comments with a slight sigh, a grunt of dismissal of these ideas. We made love like we always did when we were together in her apartment. I told her, I love you very much. When you first told me about Charlotte, well, I felt tears welling up in my eyes and an uneasy feeling in my stomach. If you have to accept such a job, we will find a way to save our relationship. Emma kissed me tenderly. She said, I love you too. I'm committed to you, silly, and I know you're committed to me. And we're both committed to Megan, even if she doesn't know about me. Commitment is the choice that saves a relationship. In this case, we all want to maintain balance. Staying with verbatim would upset this balance. My choice is to leave the big V and find another job. I can just take a break. I have enough money to get through this period. Thank you, I whispered to her. Emma asked softly, Are you okay? Inside? Emotionally. The last few times we were together, you talked a lot about work, and I thought maybe you were avoiding other topics. I thought for a while. Emma knew I heard her and went into analysis mode. I started slowly, I love you and I love Megan. You seem content with our limited time together and I wish I could give you more. At the same time, Megan is immersed in her world, surrounded by patients, the clinic, and new knowledge in medicine. Between her work and the kids, I feel like I'm at the bottom of the list of priorities. Emma sat next to me, crossing her legs. Well, Matthew Carter, let me remind you that you come first to me. But don't get me wrong, I wouldn't want you around all the time. She continued before I could say anything. I'm glad you have Megan in your life, as well as Elena and Sarah. This is my family. I live through you and your growing family. Every time you talk about some family event, I am happy for at least 3 reasons. First of all, I'm glad you feel like you can be open with me about your other life. Secondly, I find joy in being able to share this experience with you. The more vividly and in detail you describe everything, the more it looks like I am present there myself. I like it. And third, I'm grateful that I don't have to go through these experiences myself. Isn't this stupid? I like to hear about it, but not experience it myself. I wanted to say something, but Emma put her finger on my lips. I'm not finished yet, she said sternly. She collected her thoughts and continued. Megan chose a difficult profession, and she is good at it. Her inattention to you is temporary. Either way, you're both dancing around each other, working hard at work and raising kids, and still expecting the relationship to remain as romantic as ever. But that's not true. That's life. Rest assured, if you lived here and we were married, we would have the same relationship as you and Megan. You would fly to the East Coast once a month to spend some romantic time with her. She laughed and added, Maybe next time you come home, you should think that this is what's happening. I laughed and said, I'll try. What else is bothering you? Emma asked. If you and I were married, would you want me to feel guilty about having an affair with Megan? Emma thought for a moment, then replied, Deep question. Do you feel guilty? Sometimes, I answered thoughtfully. To be honest, I divided my life into several compartments. When I'm with you, I'm your boyfriend. Over these 10 years, we have developed our own vocabulary, our own rituals, our own shrines, and our own forbidden topics. We are now in my Western compartment. In the Eastern compartment, Megan, children, our parents, circle of friends. My roles include husband, father, son, son-in-law, friend, and so on. We speak a different language there. We have different rituals, sacred cows, and taboos. She asked, So if everything stays in its box, don't you feel guilty? Usually, I answered thoughtfully. Sometimes something happens that reminds me that both worlds exist, like when my friend Mark admitted that he had a series of fleeting affairs. A completely different situation without love, but it reminded me that I live in two worlds at the same time. What bothered him most was the stigma of being a cheater. This word bothers me too, but somehow it doesn't feel like cheating. I'm just in love with two women, and one of them knows about the other. After a pause and a few kisses, Emma asked, "Have you ever told anyone about us?" "No, to no one. And you?" "Several people at work know that I have a boyfriend. I also told my sister a couple of years ago. She was worried that I was gay. She sometimes asks about you, and I tell her what we do our dates. She understands me well and doesn't judge me for dating a married man, but she always reminds me that she doesn't want to see me suffer." "After all these years together, do you see any development in our relationship that could cause you pain?" I asked with concern. "No. If this all stopped tomorrow, I would still be the most grateful person on the planet because I had all this time with you." I leaned over and kissed her. I said, "We're both 30-something years old. Presumably your biological clock is ticking very loudly. Do you want to have children? If we don't do anything about it, will you feel the pain?" "God, no," Emma exclaimed. "This is one of the main reasons why I love watching you and your children from 3,000 miles away. I don't like children except to hear about them from someone else. Same with my nephews and nieces. Moreover, the thought of giving birth scares the living daylights out of me, not least because of your detailed descriptions of Elena and Sarah's births." Ugh. We both laughed, but I felt some shadow of the past hidden in Emma's soul, a part of her that she did not share with me. Perhaps it was her tone. Even though her parents lived an hour away, I knew she rarely saw them. But when she spoke about them, it was always with warmth and pride. Her father recently retired, and her mother stopped working full-time. Her sister's family lived in Texas, and again, despite their family connection, they rarely saw each other. The conversation moved to more neutral topics, and then the kiss of sleep ended the night. By the time I returned to the West Coast 4 weeks later, Emma's work situation had changed dramatically. She was left without work. Of course, I knew about this from our telephone conversations. I was able to arrive a day early, so we had the whole afternoon and evening before my business meetings started. I didn't even have to come up with an excuse. Megan was supposed to be working at the clinic, and she simply accepted my words that I would have a quiet day in the Bay Area, no questions asked. She seemed unusually tender when we said goodbye. "So, I got my first unemployment check on Friday," Emma announced with a smile. She continued, "I feel guilty. I have earned so much and saved so much over all these years. They even paid me for any unused vacation days and allowed me to exercise stock options." "Are you going to look for a job, or are you going to let the world find you?" I asked. I threw some pebbles into the pond, and they made waves. Let's see what happens next. Otherwise, I guess I'll let the world find me, as you put it. I was still in awe of Emma's dedication to our relationship that she had expressed a month ago. I knew she was going to stay close to her home in Palo Alto. I offered my help. By this point, I already had a wide range of contacts in the area. Emma became interested, so I pulled out my planner, letting her scroll through my contacts. Most of them were in Oracle. "We should have done this sooner," Emma said. "We know a few of the same people, like this Berkeley technology professor, Carl Reynolds." "You should talk to scientists," I advised. "They tend to be good networkers. Reynolds probably knows what's going on at every tech company in the area." Emma nodded, agreeing with the idea. She also chose 2 more names of people she would like to meet. Before the end of the hour, she had made appointments with them for the next week. I muttered something inarticulate into the phone. The room was dark. "Hello, is Dr. Carter there? Sorry for the late call, or rather early, but one of her pregnant patients has just been admitted to the hospital. Labor starts in about an hour, and we need her to arrive." I handed the phone to Megan, who woke up with a groan and began listening to the midwife from Newton Wellesley Hospital explain the situation. Megan got out of bed and went to the bathroom. I opened one eye and looked at the clock next to our bed. The digital display read 4:12 am. While Megan was getting dressed, she said a few words to me. "I won't be back until dinner. I was supposed to have rounds at about 6:30, so I'll just stay at the hospital and then go to the office. Although this birth can change everything. Bye, dear. She kissed me on the cheek. She was already fully awake, as a doctor who is about to deliver a baby should be. A few minutes later, I heard the garage door go up and down as she pulled out of the house. The hospital was 10 minutes away. Being married to a female doctor is a unique experience. For example, we sometimes make dinner reservations as Mr. and Dr. Carter, but all places default to the assumption that the doctor is me, when in fact it is Megan. As an obgyn, she receives calls at all hours of the day, including weekends. There are no days off in this profession. Not all the nurses or patients know that Dr. Carter is a woman, and they start telling me about symptoms before I can stop them. I usually don't want to know about the symptoms. After 5 years of working as a physician's assistant, Megan decided she wanted to become a real doctor, as she called it. It took her 3 more years to complete her medical degree, followed by a year of internship and another year of residency. Luckily, she was able to complete her training, internship, and residency within 30 miles of our home in Massachusetts. She was now an obgyn in a family practice with 10 other doctors, one of whom was her older friend and mentor, Dr. Badre, although she said he wanted to retire and move to Florida. Since our wedding 20 years ago, Megan has been obsessed with the desire to succeed in the medical field. At first, she thought she would become a medical assistant, but then she decided to become a physician's assistant. After 5 years in this position, she began going back to school to become a full-time physician. She already knew what specialty she wanted to pursue based on her work in family practice with a mentor. Despite her obstetrics and gynecology practice, she continued to work in a clinic in Boston. She has also worked on clinical trials with several pharmaceutical companies and conducted research into the treatment of postpartum depression. In the latter area, she has already published 4 articles in peer-reviewed journals, one of which was in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine. Although most of Megan's time was devoted to professional activities, she somehow managed to find time for the girls Alina, or as she preferred to be called, Al and Sarah. They were now 12 and 10 years old, respectively. Megan wasn't the mom who drove her kids to soccer practice, took them to the mall, and then to meet friends. She emphasized quality time with the girls, often taking them to cultural events or taking them out to lunch if they were not at school. We also added a nanny to our family, Esmeralda Sanchez, or Izzy as we called her. She was an older woman, recently widowed for the second time. Izzy cooked and cleaned the house, and also proved to be an experienced driver, taking the girls from one event to another around their busy schedules. Of course, our standard of living rose again as our careers progressed. The girls grew older, and we added a helper to the family. As a result, we bought a larger house in Wellesley, with a separate apartment for Izzy above the garage. My job at Oracle remains the same. However, the challenges of the high-tech market have increased manifold and continue to be a daily problem. Through bonuses, stock options, and feedback from my coworkers and boss, I achieved outstanding results while managing the company's operations in the Northeast. Our initial efforts to partner with large consulting firms have yielded excellent results over the past 10 years. This was a personal project that I took some risks into 10 years ago. I offered free training to consultants at large accounting firms, believing that if they were literate in Oracle and its use, they would recommend it to their clients. My bet was more than justified and quickly made me one of the best employees in the company. My business travel also increased during this decade. I helped organize a similar consultant training program in other regions. In parallel, we also overhauled our national account management, and I led this effort. One of the calming factors in my life was my secret relationship with Emma. I think some of my colleagues on the West Coast thought I was weird for refusing social events after work. I took part from time to time just enough so as not to arouse undue curiosity. Several people in the company knew that the company had rented a small apartment for me on the outskirts of Redwood City. However, no one tried to visit me there. I didn't even install the phone. Instead, I relied on cell service to keep me connected no matter where I was. My secretary was the only person who called me regularly, sometimes 10 times a day. Given the time difference between the East and West Coasts, her calls usually stopped around 3 or 4 in the afternoon. My reputation in the company was that of a results getter, dedicated, and reliable. When I heard that someone perceived me as the right guy, I often smiled to myself, thinking about my secret Emma's secret. Not a day went by that I didn't think with love and affection of both Megan and Emma. Between my travel schedule and Megan's work schedule, there were months when I saw Emma more than my wife. My relationships with both women have stabilized and matured. I was with Emma for 22 years and married to Megan for 20 years. My friend and colleague Kevin O'Connor remarried a few years ago and was trying to achieve some stability in his personal life. Although we no longer work together as often as we used to, every couple of weeks we would grab a steak and dinner at the restaurant closest to the office. We were both 45. Kevin admitted that he is in the midst of a colossal midlife crisis, which he is trying to hide from his wife and stepdaughters, both in their teens. He wasn't sure if he wanted to stay at Oracle, even though he had accomplished a lot and was one of the company's leading executives. His children were typical teenagers, but he had difficulty communicating with them. He doubted whether he should have married a second time at all. He listed a list of typical physical changes associated with a midlife crisis: a weakened sex life, a balding head, panic attacks, and anxiety. I think there is something else I want to achieve, but I don't know where or how, he told me. I feel constrained. I want to do something crazy, but I've already done so many things when I was younger. And of course, I don't want to ruin my marriage again. I've been in this situation before, and it was very painful. I lent him a sympathetic ear, noting that he had recently purchased a used Corvette, symbolizing his search for change and new satisfaction in life. One night, as Megan and I were having a late dinner, having both spent 14 hours at work, I mentioned Kevin's struggle with his crisis. I wondered if she had encountered something similar in her research, perhaps knowing of some pharmacological solution to his anxiety and restlessness. To my surprise, Megan laughed. Most men say they are having a midlife crisis, she said with amusement. It's part of the transition from youth to maturity. I'm surprised that you don't experience this yourself. When that happens, you'll want a sports car, a lover, a tattoo, and a motorcycle, among other things, and not necessarily in that order. She looked at me over her glasses and added, "Just please come home to Sarah and Izzy from time to time." She laughed again and went back to her dinner. My heart sank when Megan made the mistress joke. I'm sure I looked scared and hoped I was able to hide my reaction because I really didn't want to go through a crisis. Megan continued to chuckle at the idea that I might be having a midlife crisis. A moment later, the doctor in her woke up, and she said, "Women also have a midlife crisis. Mine probably came early. It was my call to become a doctor, where I could stay on the path to art and live a life of pleasure, spending every day with a cup of tea and chocolate." More typically, women experience a crisis when the last of their children leaves home, the so-called empty nest syndrome. Other reasons could be the death of a beloved parent or problems at work. Am I going to have a midlife crisis? I asked, trying to hide my reaction a few minutes earlier. No. A real deep psychological crisis with guilt over unfulfilled goals, the search for something uncertain, anxiety, alcoholism, sports cars, affairs, divorce, and marriage to a trophy wife affects only 1 in 5. A much larger percentage of people experience something similar, but not in such a deep and long-term form. For men, the crisis lasts longer than for women. Megan looked at me with her fork frozen in the air. If you don't plan for a crisis, then you have a good chance of avoiding it. Tell your friend Kevin to focus on something outside of himself, and he'll probably be able to avoid this blow. If he gets stuck in this, the crisis will never let him go. Now I laughed, but promised to pass on the message to Kevin. A few days later, I actually passed it on, and a few days later, I was sitting on a plane flying back to the West Coast. On the plane, I thought again about my life, especially the role Emma and Megan played in it. While a Porsche would be nice, and I might even consider one when I get home, The fact remains that I had had a mistress longer than I had been married more than 20 years. I confessed to myself my love for two women. I could come up with grievances and inattention from Megan, but I was more to blame than she was. I might even be offended by Emma. After all, she had initiated and purposefully made herself so attractive in the early years of our relationship that now any other path than the one I had chosen seemed impossible. I was physically attracted to both women and, 2 decades later, remained faithful to them to the exclusion of all others. Megan's work affected our sexual intimacy more than I wanted, but at this point in our lives, it seemed less important than it had been 10 years ago. I saw an article in a book when I was browsing in a bookstore, and it said that affairs don't necessarily happen because of sexual attraction. After our initial entry into this territory, even Emma and I grew cold. In some of the visits I made to Emma, we were more concerned with each other's warmth and comfort than with the passionate sexual adventures that anyone might imagine. More than the physical side, I remained emotionally involved, attached to each one. I couldn't end my life with one of them. I would be incomplete and probably unable to carry on with my life in any new way if both women were not there. I thought I had become more open about my feelings, especially in the last decade. Given my preoccupation with work, I hid little from both women. I didn't complain to Emma about Megan. These were personal things that I needed to deal with on my own. I kept Emma a secret from everyone. The more I thought, the more I realized that I was not as open with my dreams, thoughts, and feelings as I had thought about myself a few minutes earlier. There was a part of me, a big part, that I didn't share with anyone. I regretted it. The more I thought about it and accepted this flaw in my personality, the more I regretted not opening up more to Megan or Emma. What did I think they would do? Was I that afraid of their reproach or criticism? My God, at work I have fought battles that would have made Napoleon shudder. Megan was analytical and clinical when I brought problems to her. She was an excellent thought partner, but she did not have a deep understanding of the high-tech field in which I had risen and worked all these years, just as I did not have a deep understanding of the pressures and work she was doing. Emma knew the high-tech field and was often unusually insightful in matters of office politics, not to mention interactions between companies. She also understood modern relationships and more often than not encouraged me to delve deeper and more fully into my relationship with Megan. I don't think it was a sacrifice on her part. She loved me and fully accepted the fact that I loved two women. With Emma, I could discuss the crazy situation that I had been developing all these years. She understood. She told me, "There is no normality. Normality is something you make, what Megan creates. If you don't like normal, change it. You changed it all those years ago. You have gone beyond the stereotype that requires being a couple and excluding everyone else." The flight attendant brought me another glass of wine, and I thanked her. She stopped to see if I wanted to talk. The next seat in first class was empty. When I returned to my thoughts, she disappeared into the depths of the salon. Normality. Loving two women is not normal. Then I thought about the women I loved, my mother, my wife, my daughters, and Emma. Years ago, I didn't think about the differences in the love I felt for each of them. My mind scolded me. Only two of them were relevant in these reflections, Megan and Emma. I flew from one to another in my mind, analyzing, testing, weighing, questioning. The scales did not move from the position I had established decades ago. I loved them both equally and unconditionally. I thought about the future. Will I be able to predict the trajectory of our lives as we move another 20 years into the future? I'll be about 65 and ready to retire. How will it be? Will both women still play a role in my life? It pained me to think otherwise. Emma showed unusual tenderness when I opened the door to her apartment with my key and found her reading on the sofa. I returned her affection as we kissed and hugged each other. As she pulled me into the bedroom, I protested that I might need to take a shower to wash off the airport grime. Emma laughed and assured me it didn't matter. We made love. Later, I fell asleep in her arms, and all the worries of the world seemed to disappear. I woke up early and quietly climbed out of bed. As usual, I was on Eastern Time. I put on my robe and went into the kitchen. I made coffee and then went out onto the balcony on the second floor of Emma's apartment. Dawn was just beginning in the Bay Area. I stood barefoot on the cool tiles and enjoyed the warmth of the coffee and the morning coolness and humidity. Every sensation made me extraordinarily alive and sensitive to the world. I was grateful for my life and how things turned out. Emma's arms were around me a few minutes later. We showered together, got dressed, and picked out breakfast at a diner a mile from the apartment. Emma perked up as we talked, sharing with me some of the latest plans from her new employer, Apple. She became the main link between Apple and integrated circuit manufacturers, Intel and AMD. Of course, she continued to interact with magnetic media companies. I'm working about 3 years ahead of where we are now, Emma said excitedly over breakfast. We want to increase speed and performance by just 4 times at the same price. I think we'll focus on laptops, although not exclusively. This is a weak point for our competitors, and we see an opportunity to fill this niche. We discussed what had happened in the industry, pausing briefly to lament the excessive news coverage of the O.J. Simpson trial. After breakfast, we went to our respective places of work. Emma went to Cupertino, and I went to Redwood City. We were back together for the next 4 nights before I took a red-eye flight back to Boston on Friday night. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear Matthew, happy birthday to you. I stood in the doorway with an expression of mock horror as hundreds of our friends sang to me loudly and very out of tune. I had turned 60, the big 60, as the huge poster that hung over the fireplace in our ornate living room proclaimed. My secretary, Beth, kept me at work for 45 minutes that Friday night, forcing me to deal with some new and what I thought were complicated HR reporting requirements before the end of the quarter. Now I understand why. A few minutes after I arrived home, she showed up with a big smile on her face and a heartfelt hug for the boss. Someone thrust a bottle of wine cocktail, my standard drink, into my hands, and I walked around the crowd until I found Megan to kiss her and thank her for the surprise party. She beamed with happiness and laughed, glad that she was able to organize this event. Of course, she was the same age, but she insisted on a much more modest celebration of her birthday a few months earlier. Both my daughters were at the party. Elena, now 27, had flown in from Washington with her fiancé, Craig Elliott. Sarah, 2 years younger, lived and worked in downtown Boston. I learned that her steady boyfriend couldn't make it from Pennsylvania, where he was in graduate school, but would be arriving later on a mid-October weekend to wish me a happy 60th birthday. Megan held my hand tightly with an unusual tenderness for her, and practically did not let go as we moved among our friends. I often noticed her staring into my eyes or studying my reaction to something or someone. As the evening went on, I became more and more aware that, despite the joy and happiness of this event, something was wrong. I couldn't figure out exactly what it was, but I assumed it had something to do with Megan's attention and behavior. She was too attentive to me and, considering our age, too gentle. Everything began to calm down around 11 in the evening, and by 11:30 we said goodbye to the last guests. The catering company kept the kitchen tidy, and they too left, leaving us with a spotless house until midnight. Sarah, Craig, Elena, Megan, and I gathered for a nightcap after the last team left. I thought about some of the parties we had in our 30s and 40s that didn't stop until the sun came up. After kissing, hugging, and shaking hands, we went to our bedrooms. Megan and I went into our bedroom, and I began my nightly rituals of getting ready for bed. As I was putting on what were called my pajamas, sweet shorts, and a t-shirt, I noticed Megan sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at me. I looked at her and asked, "Are you going to bed, or are you reading some hot medical magazine?" I smiled. Megan shook her head and patted the bed next to her with her hand. "No, no magazines for today. Just sit with me for a minute. I need to say something." Her voice was serious. I walked up to her and hugged her. "What's happened?" I asked, sitting on the bed and hugging her. "Matt," she began, suddenly sounding broken and depressed, so different from the one she'd had for the last 6 hours at the party. "I'm sick, very, very sick." She looked at me, her eyes full of tears, and then burst into uncontrollable sobs. This was completely different from my professional wife, who saw everything. For years, she was the stone wall of the family with an iron will and the mental strength of a titan. Now something was very wrong if she was reacting like that. I hugged her and kissed her forehead. With my finger, I wiped away the tear tracks from her cheeks. "Hey," I said, looking into her eyes, "we can work through this, find a way to heal you. What disease are we talking about? What do we need to do? What's happening?" I, I, I have a rare form of leukemia," she said, sobbing. "This is not good. I found out on Tuesday, part of my annual checkup, and then there were some more lab tests. I've spent a lot of time over the last 3 days checking the diagnosis and exploring my options." She stopped and looked at me, her eyes red and teary. "Oh, Matt, I love you so much." I hugged her tighter again. I said, "I'll quit my job. We will focus on healing you. We will do whatever it takes." Megan shook her head. Her sobs slowed, and she spoke in her doctor's voice. "There is no cure for this. It's deadly." Her words hit me so hard that I recoiled. My body shook. I was stunned. I was losing Megan. "How deadly? What time? I mean, what's the forecast?" 5 to 9 months at this stage, maybe a little longer. Megan buried her head in her hands as I rubbed her back, and then pulled her into my lap. We cried together for a long time. She explained that she had a complication of chronic lymphocytic leukemia known as Richter's syndrome. I didn't understand everything she told me about the disease, but I understood that she had it and that it would kill her, most likely within a year. There was no treatment. There were no methods to mitigate the disease. We told the kids the next morning amid another burst of tears and despair over the impending loss of my wife and their mother. Almost everywhere I looked that morning, there were tear-soaked handkerchiefs. The only positive thing I saw this weekend was that Elena and Craig decided to move their wedding date to December, closer to Christmas, so Megan could be there in relatively good health. On Monday, I went to work with Megan, and we met for an hour with her colleague, Dr. Richard Creech. Megan began the meeting by insisting that he not hide anything from us or soften the situation. He was an oncology specialist and had many years of experience treating patients with leukemia. His impressive professional achievements only increased his confidence. He explained to Megan that her illness was at a stage where there were no medications left that could have a significant impact on her condition. "Megan," he said, "the numbers are not improving. We hope to stabilize the situation, but chemotherapy has no effect. Richter syndrome is a very complex and difficult to treat disease. I know you asked about the possibility of a bone marrow transplant, but I don't think that will help. Bone marrow injury may even speed up the process." I asked, "So what should she do?" "Nothing." Creech thought for a minute and then said softly, "Yeah, nothing." He turned to Megan and said, "Enjoy the last months of your life, take advantage of palliative care, and find a way to transition peacefully." He made eye contact with Megan, and they both nodded at each other. "Thank you," Megan said. "I am stopping treatment now while I can still do something and move." He nodded. "The side effects of a month of chemotherapy will go away faster than they appeared. Go and do something nice together." He nodded at me and gave us a weak smile. It took Megan another week to overcome the nausea and other debilitating effects of chemotherapy. At that moment, she decided that we should go to a camp in northern Maine, just the two of us. I left myself on a limited schedule at work so I could be with Megan. Now, without much effort, I took an indefinite leave of absence, and the two of us went outdoors to our lake in Maine. Every day, I took Megan on the boat on the lake, and we went for short walks while she recuperated. She noticed that her regaining strength from chemotherapy would be matched by the weakening caused by the disease. She decided that this happened in the second week of our stay at the camp. Our walks became short, and Megan slept a lot. After about a month, Megan began to rely on me for support when she walked. I made her a walking stick from a piece of driftwood we found along the lake shore. Within a few weeks, I was helping her bathe and taking care of myself. I already cooked all the dishes, although it was not my strong point. Megan decided she needed medication and another thorough evaluation with Creech to see how Richter's syndrome was progressing, so we returned to Wellesley. Creech confirmed what Megan already knew. Her condition deteriorated a little faster than expected. Her life became more passive. She read a lot, especially what she called trash novels. She spent more than half the day in bed, resting or sleeping, and I often found her dozing in her favorite chair at other times. At her insistence, I returned to work. People were sympathetic to what Megan was going through, and I had to come up with some appropriate responses to their common questions and expressions of concern. I admitted to myself that I felt guilty for working. I could get lost in the complexity of the company and our aggressive marketing, sales, and customer service program. We had the best-selling enterprise database package in the world, and we were on our way to improving it. I could hide in the details and encounters from the terrible situation Megan faced. It's not like I left her alone with this, not far away. I dedicated myself to making her life as easy, peaceful, and loving as possible. I canceled all my trips to the West Coast, taking advantage of the opportunity to hold meetings via video conferencing that the office had recently installed. Emma was not only sympathetic and understanding of Megan's situation, but when we talked, we often focused on things I could do to alleviate her suffering and ease her transition. We knew that we would have the opportunity to spend time together after everything was over. We hired daycare for Megan. This, coupled with my limited schedule, meant she had 24/7 supervision. The number of drugs to combat the various side effects of the disease grew every week. 4 months after Megan learned of her illness, we turned the living room into a hospital room. We also started 24-hour nurse care. I worked less and often spent hours at her bedside, sometimes just holding her hand while she slept. Megan turned pale, her skin taking on that deathly clear color that is too often associated with the dying. She found peace with the spiritual side of her temporary life. She liked it when I read spiritual books to her. She said that she found in them the peace and quiet that she needed to fight the disease. On Wednesday morning, Megan surprised me again. I read to her, but my voice weakened, and I asked for a break to drink a cup of coffee and regain my strength. We felt harmony with each other. "I like it when you read to me," she said. "Are you telling me a story, but you're telling me that you still love me?" She smiled at me. I squeezed her hand and spoke words of love forever. "Matt," she said, "I want you to do something for me before I run out of steam." "What, honey?" "I want you to bring Emma to me. I want to meet her face to face." Emma seemed to take Megan's request calmly, without any hesitation. "I'll be on the next flight," she said. "I'll call you in a few minutes after I've got everything settled." As it turned out, she flew in on a red-eye the next morning. She later admitted that she had been ready for this meeting for almost her entire life. Megan took some pleasure in the fact that she knew about my long-standing affair with Emma. When I asked her, "How did you know?" she simply smiled a sly smile. She replied, "I'll tell you later when we're all together. Don't worry, I won't say anything until Emma is here." I even asked, "Is there something you want to know?" Megan replied, "Nothing, and that's it. Wait until Emma arrives, and then we'll talk." I obeyed her order. She fell asleep on the hospital bed with a peaceful smile on her face. The next morning, I drove and met Emma at Logan Airport in Boston. It was the first time I had seen her in months since Megan announced her diagnosis. We hugged and kissed at the airport. I really missed her, but was unsure how the day would go. Emma seemed more confident. As I drove with her to Wellesley, I noted how the distance between my two worlds, my two loves, finally diminished to nothing on that short journey from the airport to my home. For 35 years, my mind screamed. I kept my two worlds so separate. Megan Emma, East Coast, West Coast, doctor engineer, caring love's freedom. Now, like the collision of two galaxies, I felt the energies of all these years merge into this one day in March. Emma didn't ask many questions. We talked a little in the car. She asked about Megan's current health, which I had already shared with her in our short phone conversations several times a week. I led Emma into the hall of our house. The nurse greeted us with a smile and invited us into the remodeled living room to see Megan. "She's glad to see you," she said with a smile. Megan sat on her hospital bed. She put on makeup that I hadn't seen on her face in weeks. She didn't look so pale. She also asked the nurse to give her one of her wigs so that she would look more natural and less painful than she actually was. The covers were carefully pulled over her legs, and their starched clarity seemed appropriate for the encounter somehow. Emma walked up to the bed with her hand outstretched as a sign of friendship. "Hi, I'm Emma," she said. "I guess we both know a thing or two about each other." Megan smiled and said, "Yes, and I've wanted to meet you for 35 years. I knew about you all this time." I practically recoiled in shock when I heard those words. "Megan," I exclaimed, "why didn't you say anything?" At first, Megan ignored my question. There was a long pause as Emma and Megan studied each other. I watched a palpable warmth develop between the two women as they held each other's hands. Emma sat on the edge of the bed to stay closer to Megan. The instant connection between the two women was not lost on me. Finally, Megan turned to me and said, "I didn't say anything because I love you. I loved you too, Emma." She stopped and added, "I need to confess something to both of you. You're not the only one who's been hiding something all these years." I looked at Megan with surprise and bewilderment. I didn't understand her words. Megan continued, "When you and I started dating seriously many years ago, my father insisted that I vet you with a private investigator. At the time, I was horrified by his desire to do this. He wanted to protect me, but at the time it seemed like a simple step that could eliminate all my family's doubts. I'm sure you remember my father. This was in the era before prenuptial agreements, and he wanted to make sure you weren't after my inheritance or money or anything like that. In any case, I told him that the only way I would agree to this was if I hired and received the report in person. My parents shouldn't have been involved. The decision was up to me." Father agreed. I began to understand where this could lead. She continued, "I hired Summer Investigators, which is an agency. Frank Summer was that detective many years ago. He followed you for a month and, according to him, used some sophisticated listening devices, which he described as hardly legal in those days." Megan laughed when she saw the expression on my face. "I think you and Emma had been dating for about 4 months at that point." I remembered the passionate times Emma and I shared years ago, limited only by the hours in the day and our need for paid work. I winced, thinking about what the detective might say about our activities. My anxiety seemed to show on my face. Emma, I noticed, remained calm as she sat on the edge of the bed next to Megan. Megan continued, "When Frank Summer returned from following you on the West Coast, he was puzzled by what he found, and at first, so was I. Oh, he definitely knew that you two were sexually involved, romantically involved. At first I thought my dad was right, and that you were after me for the money, but then Summer played the tape he made of you two talking about me. Emma, you told Matthew how to love me, how to look after me, how to be nice to me, how to be open and honest with me, how to build a long-term relationship." Tears began to form in Megan's eyes as she spoke. She continued, "I remember those early years very clearly, perhaps even more so because I learned about you. Matt was coming back from meeting you and following your advice. I kept hiring Summer for work. He had a friend he worked with on the West Coast. In any case, there were no conflicting reports. Matt loved me, and Matt loved you, and that love grew every day." She turned to Emma and squeezed her hand, adding, "What surprised me was that you loved me too." We all had tears in our eyes. I walked over to the bed and sat down opposite Emma at Megan's feet. I said, "You could have left. This was right before we got engaged. Why are you?" Megan interrupted me. "There were other recordings. Summer never lets me listen to your intimate moments. I think it was ultimately a wise decision on his part. He allowed me to hear some of your conversations after intimacy, as well as more casual conversations, at least the ones he recorded. They had a common theme. You were two caring people, You both cared about each other, and you both cared about me and the longevity and strength of our relationship. I had to make a decision whether to enter into this fight, this complex triple alliance that I was not supposed to know about, or to run in the other direction. She stopped and looked at the two of us. Of course, by then I was already very much in love with Matthew. I knew it was a slippery slope and probably a very unwise decision at the time, but I accepted his marriage proposal. I even knew about it in advance because he discussed it with you just a few days before. She smiled at Emma, and their hands clasped tightly again for a moment. I asked, "Have you been following us all these years?" I was surprised how much Megan knew about the development of our relationship. Megan blushed and said, "Yes, but please don't be mad at me. I'm not angry with you, none of you." At first I was shocked and puzzled. I needed to sort my head out. I began to listen to Frank Summers' advice and saw things differently. If I said something, it could ruin everything. As I delved deeper into my studies and career, your relationship became like a safety valve for me. I could be more selfish because you two had each other. I could study or work more and didn't feel guilty. I soon linked how everything turned out. I asked, "Have you ever wanted us to stop to break up?" Megan shook her head. "No, never." I tried again. "Is there something we can share with you, something you've been interested in?" She smiled between the two of us and said, "What will you two do after I die?" I recoiled slightly from her question and noticed that Emma does too. We never discussed Megan's death, or, for that matter, anything that would change our relationship. She continued, "I would love for you two to continue your relationship, maybe even get married." Emma and I looked at each other. We both held one of Megan's hands. "There is one thing you need to do," Megan said thoughtfully. "You need to find a way to tell your daughters about Emma, all of us. I will agree with whatever decision you make." She paused and then added, "Now you two are going somewhere. I'm tired again and I need to sleep." I took Emma to an early lunch at Bertucci's, an Italian restaurant chain. Again, we were silent in the car. My mind raced, trying to remember every conversation I might have overheard with Emma. I couldn't blame Megan, we both did something controversial and controversial. My mind was racing with thoughts of how to tell my daughters. We raised them to be open thinkers and to avoid making hasty judgments. I remembered many occasions when I interacted with them, taught them some lessons, leaving space for the possibility of such conversations in the future without realizing it. It's not that I wanted to make it easy for myself, but I wanted them to be able to accept these things on their own if they encountered them. After we ordered, Emma turned to me and said, "Matthew, I love you. I also love Megan. You know that through you, I have always loved your children." She took my hands in hers and continued, "Now we face one of the many challenges we will face this year, telling Elena and Sarah." I nodded. Emma continued, "The principles we thought about with Megan should apply here too. We will be honest, answer all questions as frankly as we can, and accept any consequences. We have always said that we would be open and honest about ourselves if and when we were discovered." After a minute, she asked, "How do you think they will take the news that their father had a 35-year affair, and that their mother knew about it?" "You know how to be concise," I said with a slight chuckle. I added, "There is one more thing we want to tell them." Emma bowed her head as she usually did when she had a question. I said, "We have to tell them we want to spend the rest of our lives together." I clasped her hands in mine, and we both smiled at each other lovingly. I called Elena and Sarah that evening and suggested they come to their mothers and meet their special guest on Saturday. Elena said she would fly in for one day that day, and Sarah promised to devote her Saturday to us, picking up her sister from the airport and bringing her home. I tried to think of every possible way to explain our situation to my daughters. I kept returning to a fairly straightforward, "Here are the facts" approach, followed by giving them the opportunity to ask questions. Emma agreed, and later, when we explained our plan to Megan, she supported it. Megan even suggested that I go to work so she and Emma could spend time with women. Since Emma didn't seem the least bit bothered by the invitation, I decided to show up at the office. when I got home around 6 p.m. They both looked like best friends. However, Megan was noticeably tired. I didn't think about where Emma would sleep. After our daughters left, we had enough sleeping places. The night nurse usually dozed on a folding chair in the former dining room, which now served as the living room and nurse's station. Megan pulled me close as Emma left the room for a minute. She said, "Tonight I want you two upstairs together. I know you would think that you should be apart, but you belong together, especially considering this situation and how long you were separated due to my illness. I will be pleased to know that love is happening in this house, physical love." Are you sure? I was thinking about the Newton Marriott. Don't be stupid. I may have disrupted the entire organization downstairs of this house, but I don't want to disrupt the relationship any more than I already have. Now kiss me. I kissed her. Elena and Sarah arrived home just before lunch. Emma and I prepared a small lunch that we could share with them and Megan as we began our conversation. I introduced Emma as an old friend and colleague just to strike up a conversation while the girls took off their coats. I explained about the dinner that would accompany the conversation, after which their mother would have an afternoon rest, and they agreed. We moved some chairs and a larger table into the living room around Megan's hospital bed. We made sandwiches in the kitchen, grabbed drinks, and brought out trays to eat lunch with Megan. The girls asked Megan a lot of questions about how she was feeling and whether there was anything they could do to help her feel better. In response, Megan asked them about their lives, about Eleanor's fiancé and Sarah's new husband. Megan finally signaled to me when most of our food had been eaten. I noticed that she barely touched her food again. This was a bad sign. She again, however, put on makeup and used a wig to enhance her appearance. I took her sign as a signal to move on to the main topic of conversation. Megan said in her confident tone, "We invited you here because we wanted to tell you something about our family and what it will be like after I'm gone." I took her hand. Our daughters still felt a little shaken by how openly we talked about death. I said, "There is some history in our family that you didn't know about, and now it is time for you to know and understand it." I think the girls are wondering what Emma's role is in all of this, since up until now she has simply been a friendly but neutral figure, willing to listen and appreciate the stories of the latest events in our family's lives. I noticed how closely Emma studied our two daughters. I continued, "I met Emma shortly after I met your mother, and before we became serious with each other. In fact, I became serious with Emma before I did with your mother, but it was because of her encouragement that I decided to get engaged and marry your mother." I saw both my daughters' foreheads furrow as they tried to understand what I was trying to tell them. I continued, "What I'm trying to tell you is that Emma and I have been together for 35 years. We love each other, we always have. I also loved and was devoted to your mother during the same time." Elena began to stutter. You mean 35 years? She looked at Megan, Emma, and me in horror. Megan chimed in. "Calm down, Elena. You should know that I knew about this relationship almost from the very beginning. I suppose I could have stopped it, but I didn't. In fact, I liked the way things turned out even more, especially as I immersed myself in my career." Now Sarah spoke up. "You mean you knew that Daddy and Emma—" She shot Emma an angry look. Emma, surprisingly, remained calm and accepted him with a smile. "Yes, and I think Emma is one of the kindest people I've ever met, or perhaps I should say I know of. We're telling you this because I want you to accept Emma as a friend and family member." Elena exclaimed, "What do you mean family member?" "After I die, I want your father to marry Emma, or at least for him to continue his relationship with her. I also want him to have a good relationship with both of you. If you leave this weekend with negative feelings or a bad impression of Emma or your father, it will damage your relationship with him and the future of this family." "This is crazy," Sarah said sharply. "Why didn't you stop him? Tell him. Tell him to end this relationship." She glanced at Emma again. Megan calmly replied, "I knew I always had this option, but I realized early on that Emma was on my side. She had never met me, but she knew about me, and over time she fell in love with me. She taught your father how to care for me, how to love me, how to be a good husband, how to be honest and open with me, and how to build long-term relationships." Megan paused, her eyes filled with tears again, and she added, "If it weren't for Emma, I wouldn't know what it means to be loved so deeply." Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. She asked, "And you really wanted this? Did you want Emma to be part of our family?" Megan nodded. "Yes, I really wanted that. I knew that Emma was an important part of your father's life, and I realized that she could be an equally important part of my life, even if we never met. We all deserve to be happy and loved, and Emma made our father happy, and I found solace in that." Elena, still confused, asked, "But why didn't you ever tell us about this? Why did you all hide this from us?" Megan responded, "We kept it hidden because we didn't want you to judge us or get caught up in our feelings. We wanted you to grow up in a loving and supportive family, and I didn't want you to feel like our happiness as a family was threatened in any way." Emma interjected gently, "Megan has always put your well-being and happiness first, and it is because of her that I have always strived to help your father become the best husband and father he could be. We all wanted you to be happy." Sarah was silent for a moment, then looked up at Emma and asked, "And can you accept us as daughters? Can you really be part of our family?" Emma smiled and said, "I have felt part of your family for many years. I have known about you from the moment you were conceived and have followed your lives through your father's stories. I love you because you are a part of him, and I want you to know that I will always be here to support you in any way I can." Sarah was still a little hesitant, but then stood up and, still with tears in her eyes, hugged Emma. "Then I think you should be with us." Elena followed, still a little wary, but also hugged Emma. I stood on the sidelines watching this scene and felt a surge of emotion wash over me. I walked up to them and hugged all three of them while squeezing Megan's hand as she looked at us with a smile and relief on her face. She said, "We have a future now. Now we're actually talking for real." Megan died 6 weeks later. We were all at her bedside, the whole family. Elena, Sarah, Craig, Jake Sarah's new fiancée, Emma, and me. The hospice nurse was also nearby. We have been prepared for this inevitable end for weeks now. I've been trying to come to terms with the idea of no longer having Megan in my life ever since she told me about her diagnosis 6 months ago. But no preparation, no mental training helped me. I cried uncontrollably all day, only stopping when I finally fell asleep from exhaustion. I was awake all night holding Megan's hand. She had fallen into a coma the night before, a sign that her body was starting to shut down. At Megan's request, Emma flew to see her several times before she became too weak to have visitors other than the nurse or me. Emma told me that Megan wanted to understand her better, to learn how she thought, and to learn about the life Emma and I shared on the West Coast. We held a memorial service for Megan in the large Gothic Episcopal church in Wellesley. The service was long and carefully planned over months, taking into account all the music Megan wanted to hear. Several hundred relatives and friends attended the service. I was again unable to hold back my tears during the service and was unable to say the words I wanted to say. Sarah and Elena found the strength to say a few kind words about their mother and share stories from her life. To avoid unnecessary rumors, Emma simply blended in with the crowd of visitors. She correctly presented herself as a longtime family friend at the open reception we held at home after the service. Elena and Sarah had become accustomed to her presence, and the other guests also accepted her as part of the family. While I greeted guests and received their condolences, Emma handled the logistics of the event, making sure there was plenty of food and drink and no one felt left out. She often came up to me, whispered words of encouragement, or brought me a fresh cup of tea when mine was empty. Megan's younger sister, Catherine, found me a couple of hours after the main guests had left. I noticed earlier that she greeted Emma with kindness and curiosity. As we stood a little apart from the rest of the crowd in the living room, Catherine leaned close to my ear and said in a quiet voice, "Emma is exceptionally sweet. I understand why Megan allowed her to be part of the family all these years." I looked shocked and Catherine laughed. She said, "The sisters talk even if we don't see each other that often. Megan told me about your situation before the wedding. She swore me the strictest secrecy, and I never told anyone about it, not even my husband Mark." I replied, "Thank you, but you don't judge me. I expected Sister Megan to be angry with me for having a long-term secret affair. I would have judged you probably for the first 10 years of your relationship with Emma. But as I've gotten older, I've become more mellow, and perhaps the idea has become closer to me, especially after seeing how you supported Megan, that there was no animosity or replacement between you. Your wife was always happy, and that was enough for me not to be angry with you." Megan also shared with me what her detectives learned about Emma's relationship with her family. Catherine studied me and added, "Personally, I would have done things differently, but it seems like everything worked out well for you three." She laughed slightly and added, "Although you and Emma had no idea how much Megan knew." I shook my head in disbelief. Catherine kissed me on the cheek and gave me a warm smile. She squeezed my hand and then went to help one of the elderly relatives with treats. My brother was the next one to find me. I decided to expand the circle of those who knew about my relationship with Emma. I suggested that Bart go for a short walk. He took the hint, realizing that I wanted to tell him something. As we walked up the driveway, Bart asked, "Are you okay?" "I can handle it," I replied grimly. "Megan's passing left a huge void in my life, but it's not something I wanted to talk about." Bart looked confused but supportive. I continued, "Have you met Emma?" Bart nodded. "Emma and I were together for 35 years. These words hung in the air as Bart digested them, considering all the possible consequences. I smiled to myself, thinking that there was only one possible interpretation of what I said. Bart stuttered, You mean, you and Emma were in a relationship. 35 years. Yes, I answered simply. After a minute, I added, Megan knew, and, to my surprise, she resolved our relationship. Wow, Bart exclaimed. You mean, all these years she knew? Why did she accept this? Emma and I started a relationship before I got serious with Megan. Emma actually counseled me about my relationship with Megan, giving me advice and ideas. Megan hired a detective to check on me before the wedding. He discovered Emma, and he also discovered how supportive she was of Megan and me. Why did Emma agree to do this to be the other woman for so many years? I thought she would have left in a couple of years, given your focus on Megan and family and everything else. I explained, Emma is a unique person and has some unconventional views, especially regarding relationships, our relationship. She loves me in her own way. She also loved Megan, Elena, and Sarah. Excitedly, Bart asked, What about your children? Do they know? I nodded. They found out about it 6 weeks ago. That's when I learned that Megan had known about us all these years. They accepted Emma Sarah more than Elena, it seems. Megan explained to them that she wanted them to accept Emma. Unusual, very unusual. We walked a few more steps, and I added, Catherine, Megan's sister, is the only one who knows about this now. Even her husband doesn't know. I would appreciate it if you kept this a secret. Emma and I will continue our relationship, and I don't want our past to influence how the rest of the family sees her in the future. He nodded, accepting my request. Bart chuckled. You're a sly one. All these years I thought you were the most straightforward person in the world. He shook his head in disbelief. He asked, Are you two going to get married? I shrugged, still unsure if Emma would be willing to change her mind about this. I finally responded, In a way, we've been married this whole time. We made a commitment to each other shortly after we met. Our commitment just wasn't as exclusive as most people's. Is she from California, from the Bay Area? Bart asked. I nodded. So all those trips you made there a week, a month for 32 years, my God. You had 2 wives, 2 families. How did it start? Emma and I worked in similar fields. We met at a conference many years ago. We were 25. Emma says she fell in love with me within seconds. It took me a couple of days. I looked at Bart. He was still shaking his head in disbelief. We walked and talked about Emma and I, and much of that conversation was filling in the gaps in my life for my brother. In the end, I apologized for not including him in my thinking earlier. I explained that Emma was a part of me that I just didn't want to share with other people. We walked around the block and returned to the house. As we walked through the door, several cousins said goodbye one more time, expressing their condolences, and left. I watched as Bart walked towards Emma. He hugged her warmly, which surprised her, and whispered something in her ear. Emma looked surprised, but not upset, and her eyes flickered to me. When our eyes met, she smiled at me. She later told me that Bart simply told her, "My secret sister-in-law, I'm glad." Later that day, I noticed that Emma, Elena, and Sarah had retired to the conservatory for a few minutes. I decided not to interfere or interrupt them, although I remained nearby in the dining room, from where I could see three women sitting in the corner. 20 minutes later, I saw them hug each other and return to the living room. I raised my eyebrows in question to Emma, but she just winked at me. I accepted it for a while. My daughters came over and we hugged goodbye. Sarah and Jake drove Craig and Elena to the airport and then headed to their apartment in Boston. We all exchanged hugs and kind words goodbye. Bart and his wife were the next to leave. It was the warmest parting we've ever had. Then Catherine and Mark left, followed by the rest of the relatives. Emma and I worked together to tidy up the house with the help of the catering staff, gradually returning the rooms to what Megan called Wellesley style. I felt déjà vu several times as I performed small tasks that I had done hundreds of times before, only Megan had done them with me before. When the caterer left and we were alone, Emma led me into the living room. She sat me down on a soft sofa and then sat next to me, holding me to her chest in a gentle and caring manner. She just held me silently. The worst was over. I felt comfort from her presence, from her hugs, from her love. After a long time, I sighed and asked rhetorically, "What's next?" Emma replied softly, "There will be another wedding soon, and then pregnancy and grandchildren. Then there will even be a couple of retirements. I'm ready when you are. We'll talk soon about where to live and how to stay healthy and have fun. We'll have time to do those things that we have been putting off. We will do all the rituals that we like, now more together than before." As I took in her words, I noticed long rays of sunlight streaming into the rooms at the back of the house, including the living room windows. I looked closely at the familiar oriental rug and was surprised to notice the patterns the shadows and light created on the floor. Have these patterns been there all these years, and I never noticed them? Or did I see them, but just didn't pay attention to them? Now they seemed so important. Waited a minute before answering my question, "What's next?" in a more deliberate tone. We continue to live and do all the things Megan asked us to do. We continue to be who we are. We remain grateful for all the days we had together, for all the days you had with Megan, and for all the days we will have in the future. And most importantly, we continue to love. We hugged each other and slowly watched the shadows gradually disappear. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.